This is Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily with Andrew Hustler Paterson and Michael Remis.
Hey, good afternoon, gang. What's going on? Welcome to a Thursday edition of Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily. A lot of hockey talk coming up, as well as the latest on the Bombers as they head out to Hamilton to take on the red-hot Ticats tomorrow night in CFL action, potentially clinching the West Final at Princess Auto Stadium this weekend if they can get a little bit of help from the Edmonton Elks and take care of business themselves in the Hammer. We're going to chop it up with Brandon Rewucki. We'll hit Jets, a little bit of Bombers as well, and then Ken Wiebe, post-practice, is going to join us for the latest on the Winnipeg Jets. The Jets have made a few cuts and waivers assignments for the purposes of sending to the Moose. We'll get to that in a minute. And, of course, talk about last night's win at Canada Life Centre in the final home preseason game and the second last game of the preseason for the Winnipeg Jets. A little later on, we'll bring in our pal John Matisz from The Score, check in on him and get his thoughts on the upcoming NHL season as well. We'll touch on the Major League Baseball playoffs. We do have a deciding Game 3 tonight, I should say, between the Mets and the Milwaukee Brewers. And a big Thursday nighter in the NFL, NFC South battle in the Georgia Dome between the Atlanta Falcons and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I guess it's not the Georgia Dome anymore. It is now Mercedes-Benz Stadium. New CFL 110 is up. We banged that one out after WST yesterday. So if you haven't already, check it out on YouTube and subscribe on the podcast to search CFL 110 wherever you get Winnipeg Sports Talk. It, of course, is brought to you by Garage Living Winnipeg. Also want to thank the great sponsors, including Princess Auto, Coolbet Canada, the Winnipeg Jets, Rollies Transfer, Consolidated Supply, FansFirst.ca, Manitoba Battery, Canadian Club, F Apparel, Wallace & Wallace, Little Brown Jug, Royal Sports, and, of course, our friends over at Boston Pizza. Let's get Michael Remis in here. And Remo, I meant to wish you and all of our Jewish friends a Happy New Year yesterday, so I will do that belatedly. You must have a lot going on this week between dinners, kids, and the festivities.
Yes, multiple family dinners. Shout out to my mom who's looking after my kids today, and yeah, it's a nice time of year for sure. Getting together, a lot more kids in my family than there used to be. My brother just had another baby, cousin as well. So nice to see them all together, and a great time of year. New year and new hockey season just around the corner as well. So definitely an exciting time here as we're into October now.
Yeah, we are. And we're into October, and we're down into the short strokes of the NHL preseason, which means that last night could have been the last opportunity for some of the younger players to make their mark, shall we say, with the coaching staff for a spot on the roster. Now, we'll get to the game in a minute, Remo, but the first order of business is what was announced today, and that is, as I mentioned in the open, some assignments to waivers for the purpose of being assigned to the Manitoba Moose. That group includes Dominic Toninato, Mason Shaw, Axel Jonsson-Fjällby, and Simon Lundmark, who had quite the snipe last night to finish off the scoring for the Winnipeg Jets in their win over Calgary. Milic, Bauer, Kuzman have been assigned to the Moose. And that means that Elias Salomonsson, Brad Lambert, and Nikita Chibrikov all still with the Jets coming down to the final cut this weekend.
Yeah, Simon Lundmark, we talked about him coming into the game, getting into action. He's filled in nicely. Was in that game here when Logan Stanley was out with an injury. Plays both sides. Second-round pick in 2019. He's certainly grown the last couple of years, but hey, scores a nice snipe in last night's game, and your reward put on waivers. Assignment to the Moose. Everyone who was put on waivers yesterday cleared. The Jets hoping that is the case tomorrow as well. Trying to sneak all those guys through. And yeah, Milic, Bauer, Kuzman did not need waivers. They can be assigned outright to the Moose. And a bit of a goalie competition there. Us with Milic and DiVincentis is there. And we'll have to wait and see what happens with the Jets if they go with, probably going with 2 goalies. So one of them will get sent down. It's Hellbuck, not going to be Hellbuck, so it's going to be Capo, Kakinen, or Eric Comrie backing up, and likely one of them headed to the Moose. So this still a couple roster decisions has to be made with the Jets, but the picture is getting more clear with today's transactions.
Yeah, and as far as practice goes today, Scheifele, Connor Velarde, Perfetti, Nemetsnikov, Ehlers, Lowry, Niederreiter, Appleton, Kupari, Barron, Iafallo. If that's the top 4, that is probably not good news for Lambert or Chibrikov. The blue line, Morrissey, DeMello, Sandberg, Pionk, Hayden Fleury playing on the left side with Colin Miller, and then the 4th pairing of Elias Salmonson and Dylan Coghlan. As we mentioned, Chibrikov, Lambert, Coghlan, Salmonson are the extras. And no David Gustafsson, who left last night's game, is going to be reevaluated, and no Jared Anderson Dolan. I mean, listen, this is basically the lineup from last year up front, with the exception of Kupari being in the middle. He didn't play very much down the stretch or in the playoffs. And, we'll get to some of your feedback in our fans feedback segment a little bit later on, Reem. We talked a lot about Brad Lambert yesterday and, the opportunity to play with Nito Niederreiter in last night's game. And listen, I've been on the record. I would love to see this young man make the team and get some opportunities early on in the year. If it was going to come down to how he played last night, I hate to say it, but that might mean starting the year in the Moose. And I don't know whether it was just the pressure of knowing how much maybe was on the table for him to produce and grab that spot last night. But, there was a few instances, just losing the puck battles, that they're going to be concerned about with a younger player. Took a penalty in the offensive zone. Or actually, maybe that was the defensive zone now that I think about it, to my left. But overall, it just wasn't. Listen, if you're on the bubble, shall we say, it wasn't a game that, Brad stood out and said, listen, you need to have me in that lineup. Now, he did make a nice pass later on. I thought he had a bit better of a third period. And he did have that nice pass to Simon Lundmark for that snipe. But I do wonder just how much weight they're going to put on last night's game, considering the opposition last night and sort of what was there for Brad last night. I don't know where you're at on that, but I was kind of hoping for a little bit more from 93 last night.
Yeah, I think they're comfortable with the lineup that they had. The forwards are the same ones that they started with last year. I know they added Monahan and Toffoli, mid-season, but they're not here. So I think Brad Lambert is an easy option for them to send down. I think he certainly made an impact, but maybe a couple things he can work on off the puck, maybe getting a bit stronger on it. And it's the easy option to send down. He doesn't require waivers, and he can go get some games with the Moose, and maybe he'll be a call-up later on. But I think it makes sense.
Like,
here.
if he goes to the Moose this weekend and is not on the opening day roster, I mean, that's where things will start. Brad Lambert's going to play NHL games this year. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Now, whether it is due to injury early on in the season, whether he plays his way into the lineup with what he's doing in Manitoba, kind of like what Harkins did a few years ago and called up in November and never looked back and was in the lineup throughout, I guess we will see. And I'm certainly not ruling it out. I mean, we've heard a lot of praise for Brad throughout training camp. And I mean, I can't really tell you whether there was, it was all about last night. I mean, that was the test. I just know that I think that, anyone that was really pulling for Lambert to go in and grab that spot probably left the game last night hoping that they saw a little bit more. The Salmonson was interesting to me last night in that, he had started on the left side. And, early on in the first period, there was a couple times just where, you're on that offside, a couple clears that didn't get out. I thought rebounded really well, after those first couple shifts. I will say he looked a heck of a lot more comfortable on the right side. And listen, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's why most defensemen play on the side that they're handedness. I think if you look at where the lineup is today from practice, it would probably give you the idea that, in all likelihood, Hayden Fleury's going to be the guy with Colin Miller. And I would think that probably means Coughlin's the seventh defenseman, and that probably means Elias is playing with the Manitoba Moose. And, much like Brad, if Elias gets sent down at the start of the year, I mean, by no means does this mean like, okay, well, it's not like getting sent to junior where we'll see you next year, Braden Yeager, Colby Barlow. By the way, Barlow, being traded in the Ontario Hockey League, and that was something that I think we'd be hearing as far back as the draft, that he was hoping to be on a more competitive team, and sounds like that has happened. But Elias, I think, has still shown a ton of promise right now, and I think that if they felt that they needed to, they could go and play him right now. I have a feeling the plan might be to get him a good 20-plus minutes a night in the American Hockey League to begin with. And that's going to put a lot of pressure on Hayden Fleury and Dylan Coughlin. Like, as much as we're talking about the younger players, I'll say this. I mean, neither of those guys stood out either to me, isn't that, oh, yeah, that guy has to be in your opening night lineup. So I think that sixth defenseman, as long as Billy Hanel and Stan are out, is going to be somewhat up for grabs. And, probably a more veteran player in Fleury is going to get the opportunity to do it right off the bat. But Elias, if he is with the Moose, is only going to be a couple dressing rooms away and one phone call away.
Yeah, I just think it's the easy option. They signed those veteran guys to come in and play. Hayden Fleury is on a two-way contract, but he would require waivers to go down. And Dylan Coughlin, they traded for him and signed him. So, look, these guys have played in the NHL in the past. They're going to play the third pairing role, it seems like. And yeah, going by the lines, Ken and Scott tweeting out today, looks like Hayden Fleury and Colin Miller, your third pair D, Sambrick and Pionk, your Minnesota connection on the second pair, and Morrissey DeMello, which was one of the best pairs in the NHL last year. You're rolling with that as your top pair. I'm sure they'll see a lot of heavy minutes, and with the third pair sprinkled in, and we'll see what we get from the second pair. We're still looking for that bounce back from Neil Pionk and a step forward. Another one from Dylan Sambrick, who's looking to elevate from third pair D to take Brendan Dillon's spot on that second pair with Pionk. So we'll see how that goes. And yeah, I think the roster seems to be coming into full focus here, as we only have one more preseason game left. That is tomorrow in Calgary. And just a broadcast note, I did look into this. Tomorrow's game, and the Jets game, is on TSN 3. That is at 8. And the Bomber game is on TSN 1 at 6 o'clock. So just wanted to make a little service announcement there, because I'm going to get a call from my grandmother, who's like, what channel is the game on? Because she's got an old box house, and she goes to channel 13. And I'm like, no, it's on 141, I think is her TSN 1. So I'm going to get a call tomorrow, and I want to let everyone know that it is on TSN 1, the Bomber game.
This is a good time to break out the 2 TV setup if you don't have it already. Mm-hmm. You can prepare for tomorrow tonight by getting the NFL game on one TV and the baseball game on the other. And then you'll already be set up tomorrow to start with the Bombers and then add the Jets into the mix in the second half of the football game, and then transition over to the final Jet game. Julien Labossiere makes a great point, though, and this is one thing that we haven't talked about, especially when we're discussing about the young players and playing. The Moose only play 6 games this entire month. So maybe that will sort of play into, their thoughts about, a player like either Lambert, Chibrikov, or Salmonson, and potentially keeping them with the club, and especially if they think that now is the time that they can get some of the other players through waivers. You've got a much better chance of sliding a guy through if you're worried about him getting picked up right now when everyone is making those same decisions, as opposed to a little bit down the way, especially if guys, go out and, perform half decently when they're in the lineup right now. But we'll get to this coming up with Ken and Brandon, for that matter, as we welcome them in coming up in the next 10 minutes or so. Lots of great comments right now. Although it is funny, I mean, I see SK and yours truly talking about the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again. I mean, I will remind people that this wasn't like this team missed the playoffs last year. I mean, most of the guys that we just mentioned, short of Kupari, short of Hayden Fleury, were big parts, I guess Miller as well, but he's on the club, were big parts of a team that had 110 points last year. Now, I know we'll talk about those 5 games against the Colorado Avalanche that certainly didn't go the way anybody, fan or member of the organization, wanted. But, I mean, the team did, as far as the regular season goes, which is what they're getting into right now. They put up a hell of a season right now, and the points speak for themselves. Although, I have said this a number of times before, I do think a little injection of some youth would be good for the club, and I think might help in the long run. Although if you're expecting 1 or 2 rookies to come in and be the difference in the playoffs right now, I think that might be a little naive. I mean, everyone needed to be a lot better against the Avalanche than they were, and that'll be the job first to get to the playoffs and then figure that out moving forward. So we'll touch on that coming up in just a couple minutes with the guys, but let's hear what Arnie had to say. One more game down, one more game to go. He spoke about, ramping things up and being closer to next week's opening game of the season to drop the puck in 1 of 82 in Edmonton.
Yeah, it's getting closer. I think I mentioned yesterday, they're all talking about, it seems like camp's been going on here for 3 weeks and they can't wait to just play the games and then get into next week. So nice to see the big guys like that kind of getting themselves off and running. And they're two guys that spend a lot of time around the front of the net and do a lot of the heavy lifting. And, we rely heavily on those guys, and nice to see them both get going.
Yeah, and just one on he had a really good start offensively last year, then had a lengthy kind of drought as the year went on, but he can be very effective, obviously, when he's kind of net front like that. That's where he kind of scores all his goals. Is it important, a night like this, kind of important just to maybe get some early confidence and hopefully kind of ride that into the new season? Yeah,
I think that anytime those guys can get looks like that, especially if they can score, it just builds confidence. But the other thing, like Nino, like any player, he has a checklist of things that he has to do nightly so that he gets himself to that part of the net or that part of the rink. And when he's playing that big heavy game and he's spending a lot more time around the net front, we had talked about this summer, we had talked about actually last year too, that he had a tendency to get it farther away from the net when things aren't going well. So he knows that when he's around there, the good things happen. Like tonight, the puck came to him and he's in a great spot and then finished them off.
All right, so there's Scott Arniel touching on a great game from Nino Niederreiter, who had a couple goals, and Gabriel Velarde and Reem. Gabe, I thought, really stood out. And I know this is a big F based on, his unfortunate history with injuries, but if Gabriel Velarde can play a full season and get close to that 80-game mark, I think that, he can have a monster season this year because we saw Kyle Connor with that beauty last night. I mean, not only is Gabe a real threat down low, but he draws a lot of attention, and man, he made some great passes yesterday. And, we'll get to the power play in a minute. That was my number one positive takeaway from last night's game was just how good that power play looked, the way that they were moving the puck, but also moving the personnel around, and the way Nikolai Ehlers looked on it. But first up, here's Arniel on looking forward to a breakout season from Gabriel Velarde.
Obviously, injury early on last year set him back, and then he had to kind of start over on a new team. and kind of show the coaching staff, his teammates, what he was about, what he was all about, and what he could do. And we saw bits and pieces. So the biggest thing for him is health, staying healthy. But I said it, I think last time we talked about Gabe, his passing ability, his vision, his ability to hold on to pucks is elite. And, when he does that, he opens up ice for other people. Sometimes they'll have two defenders on him, and that creates some of those holes. And then the other side, just like Nino, he knows that he's got to get somewhere close to that net, into that high slot area, and he'll get a lot of his looks from there.
Yeah, Gabe was dangerous last night for sure, as was Nino with the 2 goals in the preseason. Now, as we mentioned right off the bat, there was a lot of eyes on Brad Lambert, and it was a big game for that young man. Here's what Scott Arniel had to say about Lambo last night.
He's getting put into a lot of different looks and a lot of different situations, and I thought like all those young guys from the start of camp to where we are today, they've all gotten better and better, and that helps with sometimes from the players they're playing with, and also with kind of feeling a little bit more comfortable when they're out on the ice, and they seem to settle in now compared to maybe that first game where we saw them all and everybody was sky high on nerves, and now it seems like he's got to play 4 games, and it's kind of, I think that's helped him a lot, and he looks pretty good.
Lambert, there was a couple of line kind of juggling, especially when David Gustafsson went out and didn't return last night. Arnie just expanded a little bit more about switching up the lines and putting Lambert and Chib and Jared Anderson-Dolan together at one point.
I actually had, the first time I did it, I had all the big boys go out, Nino, Gabe, and Lowry, and they scored, and then the kids went out there, and it actually who was it? Sorry, I'm trying to think on the was it Nino's goal? On Lundmark's goal. Lambert, if he doesn't stop behind the net, hunting that guy down, and stop on the puck, he doesn't get it. If he goes for a big swing, he does a great job of stopping on it on the forecheck, and makes a great pass on Lundy, and it's in the back of the net. So there was it allowed me to get an opportunity to get those guys out there, and I was trying to get as many combinations, sort of get them to. I wanted them at the start of the game to kind of get themselves into it. I didn't want them to be overwhelmed, and then as the game go on, I kind of saw what Calgary was doing, and just helped me kind of get some line matchups, kind of some different things kind of happening.
So there's Arnie on just a little bit of the juggling and playing the young guys as well as he referred to it, the big boys together. Nikolai Ehlers was the first star. He was flying last night, and as I mentioned, looked really, really dynamic. And the power play, for those of us that have wanted a little bit more creativity from that unit, I mean, more movement, not only of the puck, but of the players, we certainly saw that last night. We know how much this team has been working on it under the new coaching staff. Here's what Nikolai Ehlers had to say about the power play.
Like you said, we've been working on it, and obviously there's still some things that we need to figure out, but I think overall we created a lot of chances today, and when we lost it, we were doing everything we could to get it back. So that was very positive.
Seems like that's a perfect example of just how you've got all kinds of options on the play there in terms of what guys do with the puck, right? And ultimately it ends up on your stick and you shoot, but there's just a myriad of options now at your disposal.
A lot of options, and that's what we want. With an attacking mindset, and I think we have that. So it's going to be exciting.
All right, there's Ehlers, and one more from Ehlers. Here he is on Nino getting in front of the net on his goal.
That is Bubsy's office. He thrives in there, so to get a guy like that going, that's obviously exciting for us. And he got 2 tonight, so yeah.
Can I clarify the nickname? Did you just call him Bubsy?
Bubsy.
What's the origin of that?
It's just Bubsy.
Remis, I'm glad you included that, because while there wasn't a lot of information we were getting from the comments, the fact that Nino Niederreiter's nickname is Bubsy, I think, was a revelation to everyone, including Mike and the rest of the crowd that was there around Nick after the game.
Yeah, a lot of talk about Nino Niederreiter scored 2 goals. That beauty one, Ehlers set him up with in front all alone and buried. And man, he had so many chances last year, Nino. I felt like he could have had way more goals. He had 18. The Jets are hoping he gets back to 20 this year. But Bubsy, we're learning, does that count? I know we're sick of hockey names that end in like Y or SY, but
at least it's not Neensy.
Yeah, it's not Neensy. Yeah, you Needsy.
Like Bubsy, like that. I don't know. That obviously comes from something else. So I can handle that. That is it's slightly more creative than the normal hockey nickname. So we will definitely take that. We were talking about Gabriel Vilardi. Speaking of Gabe, new deep dive from Connor and Liss is up right now. Just dropped this morning. So when you're finished with today's episode of WST, make sure to check over and see the new content out at Winnipeg Sports Talk on Gabriel Vilardi. And perfect time to drop this after how he looked last night going forward. And hey, while we're at it, speaking of the Jets, of course, the home opener is next Friday. We've had that ticket link for you that Remis dropped in the description last week after the first preseason game, or the second preseason game, I guess. You can jump on that. Make sure you're there. Should be a great one. The Toque giveaway, introducing the opening night lineup, and the only visit of Connor Bedard all season long. But we also want you to check out, and if you missed it earlier this week, we've got all the details on our WST. Last year was a ticket pack, and it was 4 games. This year we've changed it up a little bit. We're doing a WST game of the month. So hopefully you'll be able to join us for all 6. But if there's one date that doesn't work, you can still come to the other ones. It's all starting off with the big game against the Pittsburgh Penguins on October 20th. Not only will it be Sidney Crosby and potentially a former Jet prospect coming to town, but it's also a huge day for the organization. I think the Jets fan base in general celebrating and thanking and welcoming back Brian Little to retire as a Jet. So go to winnipegjets.com/WST. If you're listening on the podcast, you'll be able to get all the information there. You can jump on tickets for all 6 events. Prices are different based on if it's an A game. The one A game that we do have is the Pittsburgh game. So the other games, you can check out just different prices for different games. Everyone will include a beverage, and you'll also be able to come in early and join us for a little get-together in the bar outside Section 316 before the doors open. So jump on that. We'll look forward to firing it up for the first of 6 WST games this year on the 20th against the Pittsburgh Penguins. I mentioned the new deep dive that's up from Liss and Connor. There's also a new CFL 110 up from myself and Jeff Hamilton after yesterday's game. It, of course, is brought to you by Garage Living Winnipeg. And listen, with fall fully here, it's getting busy at Garage Living Winnipeg. As Pat's getting a lot of calls after seeing all that hockey and football equipment and bikes strewn all over the garage. Garage Living has an innovative solution to revolutionize your space and clear the clutter as you get into winter. It's called Slat Wall. Dozens of hooks, baskets, and shelves that clip into everything to get it off your floor. There's even a cool golf club caddy and tire racks to store those winter tires. And you can do as much of it or as little of it as you can to fit within your budget. You can clear the clutter, organize and beautify your garage with Slat Wall, as well as beautiful polyaspartic floor coatings, made in Canada premium metal cabinetry for a total garage makeover. Check out their amazing work on their website at garageliving.com and give our pal Pat Kanuga a buzz at 204-999-1234. Pat can pop by and see you at your garage for a free consultation, or you can make an appointment to meet him in their showroom at 981 Main Street. Garage Living Winnipeg, garages made for living. Folks, if you have a move coming up in the coming months, we know how stressful that can be. Let the experts at Rollies Transfer give you the white glove treatment and take as much of the stress out of that move as possible. Rollies, family owned and operated for over 60 years here in Winnipeg, and with their extensive logistics business, they're all over the city and all over the southern part of the province on a daily basis, which means flexible routes and timing and great rates. What you're going to do is check out their website at rollies.com. In the top right corner, you'll see the request an estimate feature. Pop in WST in the promo code for a special discount on moving services and supplies. and let them know when and where you're moving and what you're moving, and they'll turn it around with a great quote and get you onto your next destination. For your next move, make it a Rollies move, the most trusted name in moving and storage in Manitoba for over 60 years. Find out more, request an estimate today over at rollies.com. And as we get into October, lots of planning for winter as well as the upcoming spring on the other side. If you have irrigation issues or problems, talk to the leaders in irrigation systems and solutions at Consolidated Supply. But there's so much more than that. Artificial turf, golf carts, and other great options for your property like hot tubs and amazing outdoor kitchens. And of course, they are the leaders in small engine parts and repair. You can pop by and see Consolidated Supply at their showroom, open to the public, 1395 Niagara Road East, or find out more online at cte.ca. Just as we bring in Brandon Rewucki, a big shout out to our friends over at Manitoba Battery, your local source for batteries for literally everything, the boats and campers and ATVs through the summer. Now it's time to get ready for winter. Car and truck batteries for literally every vehicle. Manitoba Batteries got them with the best prices in town, beating the pants off the big box stores. 2 locations now, Logan Avenue and Dovercourt Drive. And even better yet, you can give them a call or order online at manitobabattery.com, and they'll deliver those batteries to you for free anywhere inside the perimeter with any purchase over $60. It's just that easy for all your battery needs heading into winter. Get prepared and do it at Manitoba Battery. Order online at manitobabattery.com. All right, let's bring in Brandon Rewucki to join us for a little Jets, Bombers talk, and who knows what else. Rew, what's going on? How are you?
I'm doing pretty good, man. Like you said, just over a week away from things kicking off for real on the ice. So this is the best time of the year. Ready to get at it.
Hey, I know I missed you yesterday, last week when I was away. You're a golf guy. Did you check out the Prez Cup at all?
I did. It was a tremendous event. I'm so jealous once again that you got to head out there and I was stuck at home. But especially once it was like the back-to-back sweeps, right? And then you got a weekend of
Friday was incredible.
Yeah,
Like the buzz in that, because it kind of felt like it was maybe over before it started on Thursday. And then for the internationals to come back with a 5 straight on Friday, I mean, it just created incredible atmosphere throughout Saturday. And then, of course, even Sunday when it did look like the Americans were going to win. But there's just something, like, it's cool to see the best golfers in the world play. It's just so different when they're playing with each other for a team. The energy, the emotion you get out there, it was fun. I knew you'd be rocking in there. Planning, start telling your wife, 24 months from now, Chicago, President's Cup 2026. We might get a bit of a crew together and make that happen. I know you would absolutely love that. Let's get to the Jets, though. First off, what did you think of last night's game? And as far as what you were looking for, in particular, when we talk about the young players trying to scratch and claw their way into the lineup. I mean, what did you make of Brad Lambert, Chibrikov, and Elias Salmonson on the blue line, who I think were attracting the most attention from interested onlookers as to how this team might look in a week?
I think it was probably pretty similar to how their entire camp and preseason has been, which was they were all solid, but there wasn't any big flash, any big statement of, hey, it's my time to play here, right? And I think we've really only seen that, in looking back in recent years from, I think, Ville Heinola last training camp. That's the last one where I can look at it and go, hey, yeah, that's a guy that's like, okay, he's on the team. He's proven that he's ready. There's been a job open. He's went out there and he's grabbed it. And again, not that they've been bad or anything, but I just don't think we've had the eye-popping moment from any of those three yet. And it's pretty wild. I know circumstances obviously dictated this, but we went from Brad Lambert being, very easily the front runner out of those youngsters to get a job headed into training camp, to now that, maybe the long shot out of all of them is probably the guy that most of us would tab to make the opening night roster, at the very least as a healthy scratch, and that's Elias Salomonsson now. And so obviously, it's always tough with that last preseason game to get a good sense of what the coach is thinking. Some coaches kind of use it as the final curtain call. Others will just, hey, we're throwing whoever out there and we'll be ready to go next week. But if I had to kind of pick and choose how this is going to go moving forward here, I think Salomonson's going to be amongst the 8 defensemen that at least suit up or prepared to suit up for the Jets on opening night. And I think we'll see Lambert and Chibrikov down with the Moose. And I don't think Scott Arniel has really, played it subtly either in terms of what his lineup has been, especially with the forward group where it's the same group as last year and there's no real spots available right now.
Well, I guess we'll see what the status of David Gustafsson is. It's interesting. At least in this lineup that we've seen today, and granted, this is with Gus out, and my personal ranking of players has Gustafsson ahead of Rasmus Kupari for a role on the fourth line. But I will say this: there is Gustafsson. By the way, this is just from Arniel, just in the last 5 minutes from Mitch Clinton. Gustafsson day to day with a lower body injury. And then Jared Anderson Dolan got hit with a shot on the PK. The spot is sore and swollen, so he stayed off the ice today. I made the case yesterday that, if you could have Brad Lambert playing, with an Iafallo and potentially a Niederreiter or Barron on that fourth line, I think that might be a great way for him to kind of, ease into National Hockey League play. Now, if you're playing 7, 8, 9 minutes a night, does that make more sense than playing, a lot in the American Hockey League? The one thing I'll say in October, and again, this was brought up in the chat earlier, the Moose play that college schedule, at the beginning of the season.
Exactly.
The weekday games in the AHL don't draw early on, and they back those up later on in the season. Whether we're talking about Lambert in particular, or maybe even more so Salmonson, I could make the argument that it makes sense, even if they're not a ton of game time, practicing in the NHL with the Jets, potentially getting into a game or two in the first 10 games, might actually make more sense if they think these guys are close, than putting them down and just practicing all week and playing a couple games on the weekend for the first month with Manitoba.
I totally agree. Yeah, I saw someone mention that maybe earlier this week, and it's one of those unique circumstances where it makes all the sense in the world, doesn't it? Like if you're going to practice somewhere, your choices are the NHL or the AHL for a youngster. Well, practice with the big boys, and then maybe get 1 out of 3 games in the NHL as opposed to maybe 1 in the AHL. So I totally agree with that. The only problem up front, at least, is that there's been no inclination so far to have Brad Lambert or Nikita Chibrikov. Chibrikov a little bit more, but we haven't seen Lambert get a shot with somewhat of the current iteration of the fourth line. Like, it's pretty much always been, 3 veterans to some degree that have skated there. So I'm not too sure. I agree with that line of thinking. I think it makes a lot of sense. I just don't know if we'll see that play out. But I think on the back end with Salamonson and with the injuries you have here, that, hey, maybe you can have a bit of a rotation between himself, Fleury, Coghlan, and maybe they each get a game in the first 3 for the Jets, and he's able to practice up with the big club in the meantime. But I think there's a lot of logic in giving Salamonson a chance in the Jets' top 6 right now, because I don't think he's all that far off from Fleury and Coghlan. There's a decent chance he's better than all 3 of those guys right now. And on top of it, you're helping the team out in the future. Like, it seems to be a win-win for me on that front, combined with the relative inactivity for the Moose to start the season.
Yeah, and I mean, like, if there was ever a time that you have that opportunity, I would suggest it's now, because of the injuries to Ville Heinola and Logan Stanley. And, those guys will be back at some point, and in all likelihood, Fleury and Coghlan will be with the Moose. If you have this opportunity to maybe get Elias into a few games early, and I'm not suggesting throw him out in game number 1 and have him, have to stare down Connor McDavid in his first game in the National Hockey League, but maybe keeping him around. And here's the other thing. I haven't seen really anything from Fleury or Coghlan that just screams, well, I mean, you're crazy not to have these guys in the lineup. And to be honest, I did, mention, first couple shifts, they had a couple difficult times clearing the zone and got sort of boxed in. As the game went on last night, Elias to me really stood out with just how well he managed the puck. His positioning was good, but also the passes that he was making when the Jets were breaking out, when they were starting feeling a little bit more, looked absolutely NHL level and caliber.
I've been kind of banging the drum that he's gonna push this team a little bit more than we might have anticipated. Now, I didn't think there were going to be injuries to Heinola and Stanley, but I completely agree with that. And I think on top of it too, Fleury and Coghlan have kind of cemented themselves or have played as pros so far as 7th, 8th defensemen. And so in a funny way, it's almost like it makes perfect sense, and all the stars have aligned to get Salamonson into the lineup here, because that, hey, if it doesn't work, Fleury and Coghlan are going to be ready to go. Like they're used to that. It's almost like the backup goalie, right? Where, some guys can handle it, some can't. And Fleury and Coghlan have done that enough that you feel good enough that we can throw them in at a moment's notice, and it's not going to, be this massive shock to their systems here. So I think, like, it's funny, man, whether you're talking about the present angle or the future angle, all signs kind of point to Salamonson being the ideal choice to start the season on that third pair with Colin Miller. And then you can kind of see where things go after a week or so, right? It doesn't have to be a complete declaration that he is or he isn't an NHLer from game one of the season on, but circumstances have put the Jets in this spot here, and I think it makes all the sense in the world to give Salamonson a nice little run to start the year beside Colin Miller.
The one funny thing, this is part of the reason why I think many of us have been so high on, Elias, in addition to the players, the fact that he's a right shot, and, they've had such a scarcity of right shot defensemen ever since, Buff and Trouba and Myers left town. It's really been handled by Pionk, by Dylan DeMello, and now Colin Miller. And the irony of it is that, you might be putting Elias in to kind of start his NHL career on his offside. And, just based on what I saw last night and just how comfortable he was on the right side with the vision, being used to it. Now, I know he played a little bit on the left side back in Sweden, so maybe he does have some experience. But, man, coming overseas, starting in the NHL, and being put on your offside, man, that's a big challenge. And I'll tell you what, if he can handle that, I think he can pretty much handle anything.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a massive ask for a guy like him. There's some players where it would be too much, and maybe stylistically they don't necessarily fit a switch to their offside. But I don't know. Salamonson just kind of checks all the boxes for me. And like you said, like, if he's moving the puck efficiently out of his own zone, I think it would be one thing if puck moving was a big question mark for him. And then at that point, it's like, are we doing more harm than good? Throwing him out there on his offside potentially to start the year. But I don't really have any of those concerns when I watch him out there. You do also have the option to put Colin Miller on his offside if you wanted to make the transition a little bit smoother for Salamonson. So there is that option. But if you're asking me to pick the best third pairing for the Jets out of the options that are available right now, I think it's a pretty resounding yes to Salamonson and Miller. And I don't overly care what side either one of them is on. For me, it's just, are they our two most talented defensemen that are available for that spot? If the answer is yes, let's get them out there, and then we'll figure it out once we put them out there. But I'm not going to handicap the team just because one of them might not be, super, super comfortable playing on their offside. I think they're both going to be more than capable to fulfill that role for a handful of games at least.
You know what? We'll do our fansfirst.ca fan feedback segment before Ken comes on, but I'll throw out the why not question of the day for Not Autocorp over at Waverly and McGillivray. And this is kind of similar to what we were talking about yesterday, specifically about Brad Lambert. And I know it's already starting in here about people's thoughts on what the perfect setup is or what makes the most sense at the beginning of the season. Whether you're talking about where Brad Lambert should be, Nikita Chibrikov, or Elias Salmonson, those three young players that are still with the club in the mix, let us know your thoughts on any of those players as to where you think makes the most sense right now, next week, for those players to be at the beginning of the regular season for the opener in Edmonton and then the home opener next Friday here against the Chicago Blackhawks. Brendan, what do you make of Rasmus Kupari and his situation right now with the Winnipeg Jets after the season that he had last year?
You kind of touched on, and I don't know if the team sees it this way, if it's like Gus versus Kupari for that fourth line center spot or a spot on the fourth line there. And it's kind of interesting because they were both drafted relatively in similar positions, albeit in different drafts. But Kupari to me has always been, if we're comparing the two, the more flashier, right? I mean, what was he, the fastest skater of the NHL last season? There's a lot of physical tools that are there for him, but basically zero production, either with the Kings or with the Winnipeg Jets. Whereas Gus, he is a very unesthetically pleasing hockey player. It's not pretty out there. You would never convince yourself that this is like a former high-end pick, but it's almost like Moneyball in a sense, right? Like he gets on base. He gets the job done for the Winnipeg Jets. I don't really have a lot of expectations or high hopes for Kupari. I just don't know if the hockey sense is there for him. I don't know if he's able to process in terms of how fast he's moving out there with how fast the game is moving. And we just haven't seen him produce for quite a long time at the NHL level in two different stops. Whereas Gus gives you a lot more versatility as well. Like he can play center or the wing. He's proven to be an adept penalty killer. He is a really smart, heady hockey player. It doesn't look as smooth as a lot of the other guys that are out there at the NHL level. So I'm kind of surprised that the team seems, at least initially this season, higher on Kupari, or maybe it's this is your last chance sort of a thing. Let's see what you've got. But if I had to make a bet, by the time the season, I'm not going to say by the time the season ends, but by the time it's around the halfway mark, that David Gustafsson should comfortably overtake Kupari for a spot on the fourth line.
Listen, I'm with you. I just think Gus brings more to the table. And Kupari has $1 million wheels, but many of the other aspects of his game are, let's just say, on a budget. So, let me ask you this. If Kupari hit the waiver wire next week, do you think he clears and makes it to the Moose?
Yes.
I do too.
Yeah, but I don't know if I'd say the same for Gus, in all honesty. Which in that vein, it's like, well, why wouldn't you put Gustafsson in the lineup over Kupari at this point? Injury aside, right?
And granted, I mean, he may have been in. I mean, he got nicked up last night, left the game. I mean, I don't know whether we should take, Kupari's over Gustafsson because of this. Listen, sometimes injury creates opportunity. I guess my point is I don't think they're running Kupari out for the first 40 games of the season. And hoping that it gets better. I mean, I think the runway is going to be short because I think competitions for spots, whether we're talking about Gustafsson or whether we're talking about Brad Lambert, just in the scenario that we talked a little bit about before. I mean, I think there is probably going to be more games for Kupari in the lineup at some point, but I mean, I haven't seen anything that has said, hey, here's my fist on the table. Yeah. I'm in the top 12 right now for the Winnipeg Jets. So, whether it's the final preseason game tomorrow, whether it's games early on in the season, I think he's going to have to show and produce a little bit more than we saw last year because for all the blazing speed that he has, just not a lot else happened when he was out there. And I think the Jets probably, at least right now, in my opinion, have some better options, I guess, in that role.
Yeah, I mean, he was pretty much like a lottery ticket from the Dubois trade, right? Probably a bit of a throw-in from the LA Kings side of things. Sometimes you hit a jackpot. A lot of the times it doesn't work out. Like that's just kind of the way, especially when you're talking about, what was he, an early second-round pick? Either that or tail end of the first round. Like that a lot of those guys just ultimately don't pan out for a variety of reasons. So, I mean, I don't think it's from a lack of opportunity that he hasn't been able to stick at the NHL level. Like you said, he's got one great tool and then 4 others that just aren't at the level necessary to be an everyday player. So on top of it too, I mean, the Jets are really, really deep in fourth line options, like really, really deep in this organization. I mean, they're probably 15, 16 NHL forwards at a minimum. Especially, I mean, I think Nikita Chibrikov can play a great fourth line game for you, even though he's somewhat more of a highly touted youngster with a lot more potential. So you have him, you have Parker Ford, you have Anderson Dolan. Like there's a lot of competition there, and I mean, even out of the names that I mentioned there, Huss, I'm not sure if I wouldn't take all of those guys over Rasmus Kupari in an NHL
Based
lineup
on last season, yeah. I mean, like, is there more there? Maybe we'll see it. As I said, I'll be very interested to see what he does in this game tomorrow night, assuming that he's going to be playing in that role. Because I do think there's an argument to be made that Brad Lambert can fit there to at least start the season and see how things go, and that would be good for the player and good for the organization. But at the same time, I mean, by all accounts, they really pushed to get Kupari included in the deal. And for as good as Gabe Velarde was last year and how some of the other aspects of the deal looked, just that part of it never really clicked last year. And I mean, you do wonder with the amount of competition, whether there'll be a spot for him moving forward. Hey, just quickly before we go, give me your thoughts on the Bombers going into Hamilton on the weekend after dropping the 50 burger on Edmonton. It's such a fascinating game. Hamilton's not dead yet. I mean, they have won 4 games in a row. They had the comeback win in overtime against BC last week. And the Bombers haven't won there since 2017.
I was just gonna say,
it's just that weird, those Hamilton games. But I don't know. I'm confident that the Bombers keep rolling right now, and this is not a great team for Hamilton to have coming in. But you look at history, and part of the reason why this is kind of an intriguing game. A Bomber win and an Elks win would clinch the West with 2 games left. When considering where the team was after 4 and 8 games, is hard to wrap your head around.
It wasn't crazy. We kind of got to where we expected it, but the route was nowhere near what everybody would have anticipated coming through there. I agree. I was gonna say, I can't imagine the Bombers have won in Hamilton in several years. It just feels like it's not even that they go there and lose. It feels like they go there and get their brains beat in, and then they have to kind of pick up the pieces after that. So I wouldn't say this is kind of a shoe-in, like a cakewalk type of a game for the Bombers. But like you said there, I mean, you've won 7 in a row. You fought your way back from the dead. The division title is so close at this point. And when you're as veteran-laden as this team is with Mike O'Shea kind of leading the charge here, I don't really foresee a slip-up against Hamilton here. I don't think it's going to be, like we saw against Edmonton these past 2 games. But I think the Bombers just kind of have one of those TCOB games, nothing too shiny, nothing too earth-shattering, but we get the job done. We get the 2 points. Maybe Edmonton does us a favor, but if not, then we take care of our destiny next week and host yet another West Division final in Winnipeg.
How out are you on your head coach, Nick Sirianni, in Philly?
Yeah, I was hoping we wouldn't talk about this, but I've been pretty much.
I thought he might get fired this week on the bye week, to be honest with you.
I'm surprised. I think it's pretty evident now this is something that should have happened in the offseason.
Big time.
I'm kind of setting up a Bill Belichick prayer circle in my office right now. And I know like there's difficulties, and like I'm assuming Belichick wants input on personnel and different things like that, but it's a talented team, and you're just going to let it waste away like this. It's wild. And to me, the biggest sign of, and we see this in all sports, right? But the biggest sign of a team that no longer tunes into their head coach is, do they follow their basic tenets, their basic principles, their guidelines, their mission statement? And Nick Sirianni's is fundamentals, don't turn the ball over, and discipline. This is the most undisciplined team in football that turns it over more than anybody else, and they look like they haven't practiced tackling in 6 years. So it's pretty wild to me that I just don't know what the leash is at this point. Like, you make a move this early, maybe you can still salvage the season, but I mean, especially with
they have coordinators for both. Like, he's not calling the defense, he's not calling the offense. Hell, I think they'd be better off putting Big Dom as the head coach and just let the offense and defense do their things. I tell you what, there's no way. You could ask Siri whether to go for it on 4th down or not and get better decision-making from your freaking iPhone than Sirianni's done so far this season. There's still a lot of talent on that roster, though, and that is what it comes. But got a new quarterback in the neighborhood in Jaden Daniels, who's looking pretty darn good so far. What a start for the Commanders. That's going to be I mean, the Commanders have always given the Eagles a tough time, even when they sucked and the Eagles were really good. I can't wait for those games this year to see what he can do. Yeah,
it's gonna suck
for sure.
Yeah. No.
Hey, listen, fill people in. I'm sure you got lots cooking at Skates and Plates as we head into the new season.
Yeah. New episode tomorrow. I think one of our personal faves. Bold predictions, not kind of the cookie cutter ones that you see. These are wheelbarrow predictions, if you know what I mean. So we always have a lot of fun with this episode. So that's coming out tomorrow, and then final predictions for the regular season next week.
Love it, dude. Have a great weekend. Thanks for doing this, and we'll catch up next week when we drop the puck.
Sounds great, man. Looking forward to it. Talk soon.
Gonna be good. All right, there is Brandon Rewucki. All right, we're gonna have John Matisz actually jump on in about 5 minutes, and then Ken later on. I believe Ken forgot his mic, so he's gonna jump home from the rink, and we'll get on there. But now is a great time to get into some fan feedback for our friends at fansfirst.ca. Fans First, your best option for buying and selling tickets with no added fees. What you see is what you pay. And, I think many of us, myself included, have been using Fans First for both buying and selling tickets as a season ticket holder on the occasion where I needed to get rid of a couple. The platform is great. Their customer service is awesome. I had just recently, a call about something in, made a call, boom, got a text back in like 1 minute. Listen, as a customer of Fans First over the last number of years, just using their service, I've been really impressed. And, when you compare to Ticketmaster and some of the other things where you really don't have all the options that you probably want to in either buying or selling, Fans First is a no-brainer. So, if you're needing to dabble in the resale market, or like me, you're a season ticket holder and there's a few times where you have to sell tickets for the games, use fansfirst.ca. No added fees. What you see is what you get. All right. We were talking about some of these younger players and, coming out of last night's game, where things settle down and where people think they should go. Like Dom Zappia says, Lambert is the easiest to send down. Absolutely. That sometimes plays against a young player. I think that's certainly played against some young players in Winnipeg in the past. Kevin Kowalik, this is an interesting one. I will almost always vote for playing the young guy, warts and all, over a vet providing similar impact. At least the young guy has room to improve versus the vet being what they are and no better. I think based on what you said, Kevin, I will agree with you on that, with the caveat that it's over a vet providing a similar impact, for sure. I mean, if you have, a player with high potential that is doing the exact same thing as a vet, yeah. But I think we all know that coaches are probably more trusting of vets that understand everything else that comes with the roles other than, scoring the goals. And, and that's why, as we've been talking about quite a bit, it is intriguing to see what Lambert might be able to do with some NHLers, outside of the top six. Although I think best case scenario in a year or two or three is that he develops into a player that is undoubtedly a top six player and preferably playing in the middle. Julian drops in, let him play force center with Barron and Iafallo. Lambert also has been given 2 new wingers every game so far. 4C to start this season would give him some continuity. And D-Mart mentioning just Velarde with Nino was really good last night. They absolutely were. There was, I could quietly play Velarde with Nino and Perfetti as line 2 and put Ehlers up with KFC and 55. And the running man says, keep Salo up. Elias Salmonson turning some heads over the course of training camp. Again, you can keep your comments coming in on fan feedback for our friends at fansfirst.ca. By fans, for fans, no fees. All right, John Matisz, as I mentioned, coming up as well. Quick update on the Bombers. Talked about that for briefly with Brandon. The depth chart is out, and Reem, no real changes. The only change is that Nick Dembski is a game time decision for the game tomorrow, and otherwise rolling with the same lineup that just beat the crap out of the Edmonton Elks.
Yeah, no reason to make any changes, Huss. I mean, dominant offensive performance. Derek Taylor did note Nick Dembski was limited in practice yesterday with a knee problem. The Bombers list him as a game-time decision for tomorrow. But, earlier this year, it was like, okay, who's on the injured list? Who's coming off? Haven't really had to, be on the injury watch. I know Lucky Whitehead, he didn't practice, but that's kind of what it's been the last couple of weeks. And he had some really nice returns last game. So the Bombers, they're rolling. It seems to be us. They're, I don't want to say peaking at the right time, but that was the best performance by the offense, and we're getting to the games that matter the most here. And if they win tomorrow in Hamilton, where, did you say they haven't won since 2017?
Yeah, with the exception of beating the Ticats in the Grey Cup in the regular season.
In the regular season, that's correct. And if Saskatchewan loses, the Bombers clinch the West Final here. Incredible.
Cannot wait. That game will be on the 9th of November. I believe a 5:30 Winnipeg start. If, in fact, the Bombers do clinch, at any point over the course of the next 3 weeks. We're going to get back to hockey with John Matisz coming up in just a second. But, of course, all our Bomber reports all season long brought to you by Princess Auto, proud sponsors of WST, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and, of course, the home of the Bombers at Princess Auto Stadium. Princess Auto is also the place where you'll find the best deals on the most unique assortment of tools and equipment around. Everything you need to complete the projects on your list or start something new is at Princess Auto. Founded in Winnipeg, headquartered in Winnipeg, and with 2 locations to serve you, Panet Road and Portage Avenue West. You can also shop online 24/7, 365 at princessauto.com. Big cheers to our friends over at Canadian Club. I know they'll be stocking the CC reserves at Princess Auto Stadium again before Bombers take over for another big crowd in their game coming up against the Toronto Argonauts. Canadian Club, of course, is the official spirit of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and Canada's oldest and favorite Canadian whiskey. Pick up Canadian Club at your local Manitoba liquor marts and keep your eye out for Canadian Club and ginger ale, pre-mixed cocktails in cans. You can grab those at your local LC and, of course, your local beer stores as well when you go in to pick up a rack. Our friends at Wallace & Wallace are ready for fall. They've been busy all summer long building fences as the fencing leader in Manitoba, now into their 7th decade. They're also the leaders in overhead garage doors. If your property needs the security and protection of a new fence, they've got you covered with vinyl, ornamental, welded wire, chain link, or wood fences. And if it's time to replace your garage door, Wallace & Wallace has Winnipeg's largest selection of overhead garage doors. Give them a call at 452-2700. The Wallace & Wallace team will arrange a time to come out and give you a free estimate. You can also visit them at wallacefences.com or pop down to their showroom on Lawson Crescent off of Kenniston. And just as we bring in John, the season is changing. The leaves are falling, and it's getting a little colder, and that means a bit of a different wardrobe. Guys, if you're looking into your closet and realize you need to up your menswear game as the seasons change, get on down to F Apparel at 190 Smith Street. Custom suits beginning at $400, along with chinos, golf pants, custom shirts, both tucked and untucked styles, and the biggest and best selection of menswear accessories in town. They're at 190 Smith Street. Make sure you to talk to them about a 15% discount for the fellas if you're getting married or in a wedding party. And, of course, you can also check them out online and make an appointment for a fitting at F. That's EPHapparel.com. All right, so Ken's coming up a little later on. We'll step away from the Jets' focus and get ready to drop the puck on the NHL season. And our pal John Matisz has his latest up at the score, 10 people who will define the 2024-2025 NHL season. John, what's going on, man? How are you? And are you ready to drop the puck on this season after what's felt like an endless preseason?
I am, Hustler. And last time I saw you, we were in the great city of Las Vegas and having a good time ourselves at,
True.
What was it called? Circa Casino. So nice to see you. But no, I mean, like, even if you think back to then to now, so much has happened in terms of free agency, the lead up to the season. And yeah, the injuries in the preseason, I mean, it hasn't been pretty. And, I cover the league for a living, so I pay attention to the preseason. But if I was a fan, I would tune out 90% of it and maybe tune in for one game just to get me kind of riled up. But luckily, the real games are starting very soon.
Well, exactly. I mean, here in Winnipeg, I mean, the big topics are, I mean, like I'm sure in many spots, I mean, how's the team going to be different this year? I mean, do you have young players that are challenging for jobs? And that's why we've been really focusing on Brad Lambert, Nikita Chibrikov, and Elias Salmonson. I mean, you can tell for many of the veterans, it's just get out of these games healthy and get to the start line for game number 1 next week. Big picture, though, touching on your look ahead to the season, a lot of interesting names and a lot of interesting situations. We probably should start off with what will be the topic around the Washington Capitals. Not can they win the cup, can they make the playoffs, although they did incredibly last year. I still can't believe that happened. It's about whether Alex Ovechkin can score enough to pass Wayne Gretzky. He's 41 away right now. How big of a story do you think this is right from the get-go? And considering his poor start but great finish last year, how high are your expectations for Ovi as the clock ticks down in the hourglass of his career, still needing 41?
Yeah, I think it's a massive story in the hockey world to start, and his first month or two will really dictate the pace that he's at. Because, if you just break it down purely on a per-game basis, he's got to score a goal every game to just tie Gretzky. Obviously, 42 would mean he'd have to score that extra goal in an 82-game season. So, it's no easy task for anyone. And I know that Ovi is the greatest goal scorer of all time, but he's 39 now. The Capitals turned over, a third of the roster. Pierre-Luc Dubois and Andrew Mangiapane are both part of the same top 6 that Ovechkin is part of. So we'll see how that all blends together. And is that a net positive for him, or is that kind of dragging him down? And there's also the side plot of how much is this season going to be about feeding Ovechkin? I even remember last year, Dylan Strome a few times making some questionable decisions with the puck just to make sure that Ovechkin got a shot instead of him on a 2-on-1 or 3-on-2 or whatever the case may be. But honestly, I'd love for him to break the record this year, but I really think it's gonna stretch into next year. I'd say he does something similar. I think he'll have similar production to last year, somewhere in the early 30s as far as goals. And then he'll clean things up next year. And, in a way that's kind of nicer because it'll make next season an inevitability. And the whole sporting world will be able to tune in from game 1 of the season. Let's say he has 10 goals to reach Gretzky starting 2025-26. That becomes, a huge story everywhere for however long it takes for him to get there. So it's kind of funny though, right, Hustler? Regardless of what happens, let's say he even scores 20 goals, I think this season is still very fascinating from a Capitals perspective because,
they made Dubois. I mean, to me, yes. And maybe this is us a Winnipeg-centric view on it, but I mean, it could not have gone any worse for LA. And the fact that they basically punted on this contract and took Darcy Kemper, who the Caps were trying to get rid of, took the rest of that contract just to move on and basically take a mulligan on the Dubois trade, considering what they gave up for him was, I mean, frankly, stunning. And Dubois in particular, there is a guy that has a lot to prove in his new home.
I mean, it's his last chance, let's face it. I'm not saying, if things don't work out in Washington, he's, out of the league forever. But, no one's going to trust him. He'll be working on league minimum type of stuff. Someone, I know
he could get bought out.
Well, I know,
The bottom line is he signed a pretty long deal for a lot of money with LA.
Yeah, exactly. Given his contract is a little more complicated. But in terms of coaches trusting him, teammates trusting him, et cetera, this is kind of a pretty short leash in Washington. And we've seen so many flashes of brilliance from him over his career that we know it's in there somewhere. So maybe there's something unlocked. I mean, we all thought that about the LA acquisition. Okay, this is where he finally kind of gets his act together. So I suppose we shouldn't trust Dubois. But Washington in general, they make the playoffs last year on minus 37 goal differential. I believe it was the worst goal differential in the history of the playoff teams in the history of the NHL. And they turn over their roster, and I would say they got better, but they're still not like a cup contender, right? So they're one of those kind of teams in the murky middle. But when you make so many additions and subtractions, it can go so many different ways as far as all the what ifs and all the uncertainty.
Listen, goaltending has been a big topic around the league lately, mainly because of the fiasco that is currently happening between the Boston Bruins and Jeremy Swayman. I'll get your thoughts on that and how that might affect the next contract of one Ilya Shesterkin. And, when we talk about the money that Swayman's looking for and what Shesterkin might get, I think it makes people feel pretty good about the number that Connor Hellebuck signed here in Winnipeg last year. But, I mean, I've been talking all week. I can't remember a contract negotiation that is, as ugly as this one is. And then, of course, Igor and his reps in New York following this very closely, looking to presumably try to become the highest paid goaltender when all this is done.
Yeah, Shesterkin, if we can separate the two situations, I think Shesterkin has a ton of leverage as far as saying, hey, Carey Price at $10.5 million is the highest paid goalie ever. I deserve to be above that. I think that's almost indisputable unless he has some terrible season and becomes a pumpkin kind of deal. But I really don't think that'll happen. So his case is more bulletproof, even when we're talking about goalies who are very hard to predict. He's shown enough in the regular season, in the playoffs, that he should be paid the highest in the league. And then you enter Swayman in the conversation. So he's tracking towards a superstar level goalie, but he's only been a tandem goalie his whole career. He's only played 132 games, period, in the NHL. I understand betting on yourself. I understand standing up for yourself, being confident in yourself. But what he's asking for, it seems like it might be doing more harm than good at the end of the day here, given how far it's stretched and how acrimonious things have gotten. Obviously, Cam Neely is a huge contributor to this situation as far as him throwing out that whatever the quote was, he has 64 million reasons to sign. I think that was pretty disrespectful. It doesn't matter how big that number was or if it was true. The fact that he basically said, Jeremy, get your act together, you're being a baby. I thought that was certainly stepping over the line. If you want to have that conversation away from the public, by all means, but to bring that to the fore just made things
it didn't help.
It made things exceedingly more complicated.
I was bringing out the gas can on the fire that was already burning. And
as we know, I think we can read the tea leaves. Jeremy Swayman seems to be fairly sensitive, have some thin skin, and the new documentary from Amazon Prime is going to show a side of that as well. And hey, that seems to motivate him. That's just how he's wired. That's just how it is. It's not necessarily an insult, but Neely, it was poking the bear there. So, does this turn into a situation where they have to trade another number one caliber goalie after getting rid of Allmark? I don't care what happens at the negotiation table. That's a huge fumble by the Bruins front office. There's no real other way to slice it. But at the same time, I do understand them putting their foot down and saying, listen, your contract demands are a little outrageous considering, we haven't really seen that much from you as far as sample size in the big picture. So it's really messy. And I think it'll ultimately resolve itself, and hopefully Swayman can go back into that dressing room and things are okay. And him and Cam Neely and Don Sweeney are on good terms, et cetera. But it could also go the other way at this point. It's gotten ugly enough that are you guys having me on in a couple of weeks and we're talking about a Swayman trade, which would be a huge blockbuster.
Well, it would be. Listen, he's young, he's talented. I still, based on what he's done in the National Hockey League, I don't know how many teams would be lining up to go 8x8. But I guess it only takes one. I know some people have said, well, it's just offer sheet him. The compensation, the fit, needing it. And listen, Boston may very well just match. And, considering how ugly things have got, I guess he would get his money. But to me, there's a 0% chance of that happening. It would have to be a trade. But I'll tell you, the worst thing that could happen for Swayman, he sits out at the start of the year, And all of a sudden, Korpisalo gets out there after sucking in Ottawa last year and shows up in Boston, and the Boston Bruins suddenly playing in front of them the way they do turn Corpy into a very serviceable NHL netminder with pretty good numbers. Then people will be saying, well, wait a second, is this the player, or is this just a really good team that helps their goalies out and consistently produces quality numbers? And I guess we'll see. It doesn't look like that's ending anytime soon. And even before the latest dust up, they had mentioned, we hope that this can get done by December 1st. So we haven't seen a contract situation like this. Like even Nylander that went late was never this public. It was never this ugly. It seemed like both sides wanted to get something done. A lot of hard heads, I think, in these discussions when it comes to Swayman. Speaking of contracts, two big expiring deals are coming up. Connor McDavid, obviously, get your thoughts on what is likely to happen with McDavid now that his pal Leon has his 8-year extension. And then the other one closer to you. I mean, it's been less noisy about Mitch Marner lately than it was to begin the offseason. But Mitch, with all the leverage going into the final year of his contract with a ton of pressure and I think a really mixed fan base as to what the best direction is to go for the Leafs.
Yeah, I mean, I'll touch on McDavid quickly just because it's almost a foregone conclusion that he's going to re-sign with the Oilers. I think it will just come down to how much of a hometown discount is he going to give, because he's going to give something, right? Like, I really don't think he's going to sign.
He can demand whatever the hell he wants.
Yeah, one, he can do that, but I don't think he will sign for the maximum, which is 20% of the cap, just based on like you handicap your team. Like it's kind of an unfair system in that sense. It's unfair to the best players in the world. But hey, maybe he surprises us. Who knows? But Draisaitl signing was a clear indication that McDavid is going to sign, assuming nothing crazy happens this season. And I think it's a fair approach from those two guys, given they just lost in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final by 1 goal. You know, management has gotten its act together as far as Jeff Jackson and, say what you want to say about Stan Bowman and what happened in Chicago. But, he's a respected GM based on hockey. So they've built around those two players, those two pillars. And so they can have extra knocks at this, extra kicks at the can. So I think that's pretty cut and dried, and it'll just come down to the money. I'm sure it'll be 8 years. I'm sure it'll be, 16 million, something around there. As far as Marner, obviously a little more complicated, but the fact that they're going into the season without a contract, to me, tells me, I really can't see a scenario where they trade him at the deadline as a rental. This is a team that's trying to win a cup, as people listening laugh at that idea, given their playoff history over the last 8 years. But that is what they're trying to do, and Marner is a key piece of that. They missed their window to trade him. He's got all the leverage from that end of things. And, his agent, Darren Ferris, has been known to I guess, encourage his clients to test free agency. Make sure you know what's out there before re-signing with the team that you're with. Now, things are a little different with Marner, given, as you mentioned, Hustler, the fan base is, or at least a decent size portion of the fan base has turned against him and used him as sort of the poster boy for the playoff struggles. That could get, if he doesn't sign during the season, and it's sort of like a wait and see around July 1, and, the playoffs are going to basically determine everything to do with that deal. As far as, does this guy redeem himself? Do they go to the conference final and he's one of their best players and all is forgotten the previous struggles? Or does he have another poor first round? They exit, and this is finally management's opportunity to walk away, even though losing such a franchise pillar will hurt in the short term. So
they'll have no problem spending that money elsewhere. I mean, that's the one thing you can say about the Leafs.
Well, that's been kind of the argument over the last couple of years with the whole Marner trade scenario is, okay, can you split? So he's making 10.9 right now. Can you split that 10.9 across two defensemen and, a third line forward? Or is there some way that you can kind of make the money work where it's a by committee filling of the void with losing Marner. And like, let's face it, like as much as he's, I don't know, let's just say for argument's sake, a top 25 player in the world, and you don't want to just lose those players for no reason, and it's very hard to obtain those players. There's something to be said for, just moving on from someone at some point. So, I mean, if you're like asking me gun to my head what happens, a prediction, I think that he resigns. I think that it's sort of headed that way as far as like how the Leafs are playing it publicly, how the Marner camp's playing it, and sort of how quiet things have been. And just, that it's similar to Nylander last year. If he has a good first couple of months, next thing you know, they're back at the bargaining table and they figure it out, and the playoffs are kind of far away enough that it's less of a factor. So I think that Marner's probably going to resign if I'm betting on something right now.
John, before we wrap up, I want to talk about two teams that we have not been talking about in terms of playoffs for a number of years. And both of them are coming off really disappointing seasons. Their off seasons have been very different, though. Buffalo brings in Lindy Ruff. They've got the longest playoff drought in the National Hockey League. They've named Rasmus Dahlin their captain. Moving forward, interested in your thoughts on just the Buffalo Sabres, and can their fans expect any different this year? And then the other one is, the job Don Waddell has rebuilding this Columbus Blue Jackets team in the aftermath of the tragedy that took Johnny Gaudreau over the offseason. Yeah,
with the Sabres, it's like, it's kind of hard to kind of articulate, but in 2022-23, the vibes were kind of immaculate around that team because there were no expectations. Youngest team in the league, Jack Quinn, JJ Peterka arrive on the scene. Dylan Cousins is having a good season. Tage Thompson breaks out. Everyone's like, okay, like they're not going to make the playoffs this year, but they're trending in the right direction. Then last year was a complete step backwards where Don Granato tried to have them play more defensive, and it kind of backfired because then they weren't scoring goals. There was no happy medium there. And there were injuries, and there was clearly just a tuning out of Granato and an obvious, plead, if you will, or silent plead to get a new coach in there. And now Lindy Ruff comes in. He plays a more up-tempo style. Okay, I think that suits their roster. I think that's a good call. In the offseason, they revamped their bottom six. It's a little more difficult to play against. It's a little more experienced. Okay, that makes sense. Bowen Byram will have his first full season with the Sabres. Again, another plus. So you start adding it up, and you start believing in the Sabres a little bit. And, especially when you factor in, okay, that young core is 1 year older. And, their goalie was Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen was one of the big bright spots last year. So you assume that they've got that figured out, the goaltending position. So it all on paper seems to add up, but I mean, this is a team that's missed the playoffs for 13 years. This is a team that the ownership is one that doesn't love to spend to the cap, who hired Kevin Adams kind of out of the business part of the operation and said, you're the GM, and he's now in his fifth season. I mean, how tense do things get around him after hiring Lindy Ruff and trying to make the playoffs once and for all? And what it comes down to, though, ultimately with the Sabres in the playoffs is the competition at the bottom of the East, or I guess the middle of the East. So after you get past those top three seeds in the Atlantic and in the Metro, well, you've got either Tampa or Boston who are going to be the one team that doesn't get that seed in the Atlantic. Okay, they're probably going to get the first wild card. Okay, who gets the second wild card? Well, you've got the Senators, you've got the Sabres, you've got the Capitals involved, you've got the Red Wings involved, maybe the Penguins, depending on how much Sid can drag them along. Like, there's just a lot of teams there. Like the Sabres could have a great season, level up, get 10 more points than they have in the past couple of seasons and still miss out. So it's really kind of a difficult thing to gauge and handicap, but I do like their roster on paper. I think they're fairly balanced. I think there's a lot of upside there. As far as Don Waddell, I mean, kind of an impossible situation, right? He goes from Carolina, this cup contending team that really just is on autopilot at this point in terms of getting into the playoffs, at winning at least one round. Obviously, they need to go further in the playoffs, but nevertheless, very comfortable situation as far as being in a win now environment. Goes to Columbus, already going to be, a pretty tough task, albeit really good prospect pool, really good young players, but a big lift, a heavy lift. And then obviously Johnny Gaudreau passes away, and there's the whole personal side to that, where not only are some of his teammates dealing with the grief of losing Johnny, a well-respected teammate, but there's also the fact that they lost one of their teammates, a goalie, a couple of seasons ago. And so you're, say, I don't know, a Zach Werenski who's been around forever. He's lost 2 teammates in the last 3 off seasons. It's wild. And then they had the Mike Babcock controvery. Like, there's just been a lot of noise around the team, and it's sort of weird noise. Weird's maybe the wrong word because we're talking about people passing away, but I guess unexpected noise or whatever you want to call it, off ice noise. So that's been weird. And so Waddell's been, by all accounts, guiding them through those tough times pretty well. And it's one of those things where grieving isn't something that you can turn on and off, right? Like, there's going to be players going into the season who are still having a hard time with this.
And think about like Sean Monahan, who of course finished up here. I mean, being so close with Johnny. Now, when we were talking about, will he re-sign with the Winnipeg Jets? Where else might he go? I mean, listen, Columbus made, I think, an offer that I don't think many other teams were. I mean, 5.5 by 5 seasons. But a big part of him going there, in addition to the offer from Columbus, was the fact that he was going to be able to ride with one of his best friends in the world and raise their kids together. And, it's heartbreaking. I mean, just thinking about, the personal side, first and foremost, I mean, the Gaudreau families and, everyone that's left behind. But there's also that hockey family. And even for a guy that wasn't there before, who came for a big reason to play with Johnny, it's just, it's so sad. And that team in some ways just feels like they've had a black cloud around them. And I mean, the 2 instances, they were just straight up tragedies that, have real effects on everyone. And then, as you mentioned with the Babcock business, I mean, a brutal situation for Pascal Vincent to go into, a terrible look for the organization. I mean, just, everything around. And then Waddell walks in, as you mentioned, and it's not even like he's putting out a bunch of fires. It's like he's walking up to the aftermath after a freaking tornado just tore everything down to the bits. And I do wonder, a guy like Werenski, like, how much more rebuilding do they do? Did they rip it down even more? Because a guy like that would have a lot of interest in other markets in and around the league. And I mean, for him, listen, he got the money, he's getting paid very well, but pretty hard to imagine playing meaningful games in the second half of the season right now with Columbus the way they're presently constructed.
I mean, they're a bottom 5 team at best. Like, the roster is pretty sad, and part of the problem has been Waddell's predecessor, Jarmo Kekalainen, seemed to just, if he had a long-term plan, he would disrupt it like every year. Okay, we're going to bring in 2 veteran defensemen, even though we're going to be kind of tanking this season. Like, what are we doing here? Why are we signing them to 3 or 4 year deals when we could just slide in some youngsters or some guys on 1-year deals? Like, there were a lot of sort of like stops and starts to this rebuild already, and then you're throwing in the personal side of everything that's happened. And, Patrick Laine gets traded. Dean Evason's coming in. Obviously, that's a positive, but there's just so much in flux there. And the roster is just so under construction still that they have a really long way to go, off the ice, on the ice. It's a tough situation in Columbus, to say the least.
Cannot wait to drop the puck, folks. Get over to thescore.com. John's latest is up. 10 people who will define the 2024-25 NHL season. John, have a great weekend, and we'll look forward to catching up with you in a few weeks once we're into the NHL regular season. Should be fun. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Have a good one.
Good stuff. All right, we're going to welcome in Weebe's World himself, Ken Wiebe of the Winnipeg Free Press, in just a moment. First up, a big cheers from our friends at Little Brown Jug.
You train day in and day out, learning new techniques, approaching new concepts, and living out the thrill of achieving your goals. Building a craft beer is no different. While you spend your hours on the ice, we spend ours here, brewing our trademark beer. Again, and again. Here's to pushing the status quo and challenging ourselves to build something memorable. 1919 by Little Brown Jug.
All right, well, things are getting busy for both the Jets and the Bombers right now, and for fans getting ready for next Friday's home opener and the Bombers push to the playoffs and hopefully another home game in the CFL West Final. Time to get your gear ready for the upcoming hockey season and the CFL playoffs. Royal Sports is the place to do that. If you have not been to Royal, you will not believe the amount of selection you've got, whether you're a Winnipeg Jet fan, whether you're a Winnipeg Blue Bomber fan, not to mention NFL fans. All the new NFL merch is in, jerseys, and of course, the brand new coaches' hats, which I'm hoping to pick one up relatively soon. And of course, Royal is also the hockey superstore in town for over 40 years. So as the puck drops on leagues all around the province, whatever you need, players of all skill levels, all ages, it is all at Royal Sports. From full equipment all the way down to skate sharpening and stick tape. Pop by and see them, 750 Pembina Highway. And make sure to follow them on Instagram at Royal Sports Winnipeg for the latest merchandise drops and sale information. And we'll get to the Cool Bet lines in a bit and talk about this Thursday nighter tonight, as well as the baseball playoffs. But Boston Pizza is the place to be tonight. We got a good one. NFC South battle between the Falcons and the Bucks. Baker Mayfield and Kirk Cousins going head-to-head. And, of course, when the NFL is on, that means Boston Pizza is the place to be. You'll have your opportunity to win an exclusive trip to Vegas for Super Bowl weekend, in addition to NFL jerseys, NFL swag, Boston Pizza swag as well. Every night the NFL plays, Monday night, Thursday night, and, of course, on Sundays. And right now, with hockey starting, with the baseball playoffs go, you know you need multiple TVs, and your local Boston Pizza has you covered. Staying at home tonight? Order online at bostonpizza.com. All right, he has made it back from practice. He is locked and loaded. He has a mic. He's putting in his headset, TV style. Ken Wiebe, the Winnipeg Free Press, joins us now. Wiebe, what's going on?
Afternoon, Andrew. Great to be with you. Happy to report not a lot of traffic on the southbound or eastbound perimeter highway. So that was a positive development on the ride home from Hockey for All. The quick updates, Jared Anderson-Dolan blocked a shot yesterday, and day-to-day, David Gustafson was on the receiving end of that big hit from Walker Duehr, but Scott O'Neill thinking it was good news on both fronts. Neither guy likely to require IR, barring any unforeseen circumstance. But both likely out of Friday's game against the Calgary Flames, depending on whether or not they would have been in. That's to be debated later on. But that's the news out of today. A couple cuts, as you've talked about already, I'm sure, and a couple young players still kind of right on the cusp here of at least forcing the decision to go right down to the wire. I guess that's how I'll put it.
Well, listen, before we get to practice today and the lines and how things are looking, let's go back to last night.
Sure.
Listen, Ehlers was awesome. I thought the power play looked great. Like, you could tell that they've been working a lot on it. And, again, take it for what it's worth considering the lineup of the guys that were out there killing. But a lot of puck movement, a lot of player movement, scored. Looked really dynamic. But I think for most people, you hope that nobody got hurt. Fortunately, Gus did get banged up. But what was of most interest was the push by Brad Lambert, Nikita Chibrikov, and Elias Salmonson to stay in the fight for spots on the roster to begin the season. What did you think about those three players individually and whether they helped or hurt their case to Scott O'Neill and Jet Management?
Yeah, Huss, I would say overall case still solid on all three fronts. But for me, Nikita Chibrikov, it was probably his quietest game of the several that he has participated in, Huss. In a game that didn't have a lot of physical nature or hitting, I would have liked to have seen him a little bit more involved physically. 2 shot attempts, 1 shot on net. I didn't really find him to be as involved offensively as he has been. I thought, again, this is what we've been talking about from the very beginning. I know there's a lot of people pushing for Chibrikov on the team now. He just needs to improve his pace of play, Huss, in order to be an NHLer, and I just don't think that he's there at this moment. I do think he'll get games this year on the Cool Line bets, Huss. I know you were talking about this yesterday with Scotty. I'll take under 25 personally, but I do think he gets games, and I do think he can be an effective NHLer. I just think it's going to take probably one more year at the American Hockey League level where he spends the majority of the year there. Now, again, health can change those factors, obviously, but I love the skill set of the player. I love the mentality of the player. Just as someone who's covered the American League for nearly a decade, I just think that Chibrikov, he'll see so much value. And again, Huss, you're not one of these people, but there's a lot of people that undervalue how good the American League is and how good it is for development. So I just think that Chibrikov has done an excellent job to reach the end of the road here. Maybe he gets a game Friday. I'm not sure. But I think the most likely spot for him, and this is not breaking news, the most likely spot for him and the best spot for him, in my personal opinion, is to be a first-line player with the Manitoba Moose. Does that mean he's going to have Brad Lambert as his running mate? That I'm not sure about yet. I know you guys have debated this a lot during the course of the week. I can understand the push towards him even spending some time, whether it's practice time, whether it's 2B or 3C line time. I'd be fine with it. I thought it was a very quiet first two periods for Brad Lambert on Wednesday night against the Flames. I liked his third a lot. And again, Lambert had lots of company. That second period was very flat overall for the Jets. Puck decision-making wasn't great, even by players who are on the point board, with a lot of, Ehlers being one of those guys. I thought Lambert had a very good third period. Used his speed, really tenacious on the forecheck, really smart pass to Simon Lundmark, who buried his shot nicely to kind of cap his training camp run, which was Huss. I don't want to change gears. I'm handing out the Parker Ford / Jansen Harkins Award to Simon Lundmark. This guy had a off the radar coming.
I think he's maybe given them a real tough decision as to maybe he is their best option right now. And if that's the case, man, that would make things interesting when those other guys get healthy, because, of course, he's the one guy that is waivers exempt as opposed to the two guys that are on the IR right now. I mean, where are you at on Fleury and Coughlin? I mean, do you think that the Jets have a better chance to win hockey games right now if one of those two guys is playing with Miller?
I mean, Coughlin hasn't played on the left yet, so again, I'm not going to go that far. That pairing, was just fine yesterday, I would say. It didn't necessarily have a great outing. I mean, I don't know that Solomonson and Lundmark were steady. I didn't think that they necessarily gained ground on the pack either in the game itself, even though Lundmark got the late goal. I thought they were stable, and stable is fine. There's nothing wrong with stable. And like I said, I think he's a capable player at this very moment, but I think it's way more important for Solomonson to go down to the Moose just for this reason, Huss, because of the physical element that is going to be part of his game. I want him to make those reads and to make those pinches and to make those open ice hits at the American League level to start, because the consequences at the American League hockey level is different than the NHL level. And again, I think it might not be very long before he's ready to give you capable minutes. And hey, I know that Scott Arniel was saying yesterday the benefit for Heinola and Stanley being injured early means that their timelines don't cut into as much of the regular season. That's true. And it has provided an opportunity to see more of Elias Solomonson, and he's showing that he deserves more and more. Would I have distinguished him head and shoulders above Hayden Fleury today, to start the season? I personally wouldn't, even though I've liked a ton of what I've seen. I just think that with the transition, there's just so many benefits to be gained by going to the American League hockey level or hockey league level and playing, 20 plus minutes a game, being used in all situations, and just sort of getting your feet wet when it comes to the North American style, the smaller ice, because his game translates very well to the North American ice for me. I just think that he'll get a lot more puck touches, Huss, at the AHL level in October and November. Like I said, I understand the schedule is a bit lighter early on in the year, but I think that in terms of that adaptation process, I think it's important for him to take that step. And again, this is not a bad thing. Roman Josi spent an entire season with the Milwaukee Admirals from my recollection here, Huss, and it worked out pretty well for him. And I'm not saying Solomonson's going to be Josi. I just think that the very best at their craft often need that important step. And I think that Solomonson will need that step himself, even though he's had a very strong camp. And he's the best news for Solomonson, Huss, he's not fading as camp moves along. We've seen this with Lambert specifically. popped early in previous camps, scored early, but when the rosters got tougher, he kind of faded into the wilderness, which is what you expect from 18 and 19-year-olds. So Solomonson has the benefit of an SHL championship in his back pocket, which will speed up the development process. To me, I just don't see the necessity to skip the step, even though injuries have opened the door a lot further than I expected, Huss. We've been talking about this for weeks, and you raised this possibility way before I was ready to go there. Solomonson has shown that he is a capable player, and this is what I've been saying. Like, he's going to be a bonus first rounder for the Jets, even though he was chosen in the second round. I think we're not far from seeing him being a very good option as a shutdown guy beside Dylan Sandberg. I just think it's probably going to take a little bit of time. And Huss, I mean, to your point about the other things earlier on, I mean, before the year is over, could you see a third pairing of Solomonson and Heinola? I mean, that wouldn't be a shocker to me. Would it be a shocker to you?
Well, listen, I'm here for it, and I'd love to see it. I do just wonder that if Elias doesn't get, some sort of a look in this first month of the season while those other two guys are hurt.
But what's the rush, though?
Just that, is there going to be a spot for him once those other two guys get back? Or basically, is the only path for him to be in the lineup this year a bunch of guys getting hurt?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that. I'm just saying that he will help his ability to be a full-time player by playing more rather than, being a third pairing guy out of the gate. For me, again, like I said, I can make the argument on the other side, and I understand why some people are. I just don't think that you have to. We always make such a big deal out of opening night roster, Huss. And I know it's different because of what you said with the two injuries, and maybe those opportunities aren't there later on. But if a player is playing to the level you expect him to with Solomonson, absolutely he could force his way into the discussion without an injury. But I don't see that happening as him starting on the third pairing and showing, rather than him playing on the first pairing with the Moose in the American League and then making the requisite step up on a permanent basis. We talked about this with Villy forever. For me, I was never in the rush Villy in camp. I wanted him to play his defensive style, show his defensive game, and then become an NHLer forever, even though he got sent back a couple times after we had this discussion on various platforms. For me, I think it's much more valuable for Solomonson to get that extra time and those touches specifically, because his confidence is only going to rise by playing additional minutes with the Moose. Now, having said that, hey, I get it. If you think you give him a taste early, send him back and then see what happens. I mean, hey, I'd have no problem with it. I just don't think it's the likely scenario for the Jets right now. And hey, what you're saying is true. I mean, as have Coughlin and Fleury put their, planted their flag and said, you can't move me. Well, I think they've been steady for the most part. I mean, Wednesday's night wasn't great for either of them. I liked Fleury's work on the penalty kill. I like his mobility. Coughlin obviously has the big shot. He has the ability to give you a second power play option if that's what you choose to do so. But again, I think it's pretty fair to say Miller's number 5. And for me, Fleury is number 6. And could Solomonson do something on Friday to change that? I mean, it's possible, but I just think that it's more likely, and I'm totally fine with it if he gets sent down at the beginning. Because I know the value of having that extra time at the American League level, or for him, it's having some time at that level before he becomes a full-time NHLer. But I'm here for it, Huss. I think he is a full-time NHLer before this year is over, and I could easily see him being a full-time NHLer before the calendar flips to 2025.
Speaking of spending time with the Moose, Brad Lambert did that. He came in, talked a lot about the opportunity that was there for young players.
Yeah.
Coming out of last night, going into the final preseason game, what would you handicap his chances of being on the roster for October 9th? And if he is, Ken, who's the odd guy out? Who's the spot that is not on the roster because Brad's been added?
Yeah, I mean, Jared Anderson-Dolan has had a strong camp, Huss. I know I mentioned the minor ailment coming off the top here, but Scott O'Neill obviously likes the way Anderson-Dolan plays. So for me, he seems like a likely candidate to be the 13th or 14th forward. Now, again, with Gustafson's injury, it doesn't sound like he'll be on IR. I have Gustafson still in that 13th spot. I mean, based on what we've seen in camp, Rasmus,
who's the fourth line center then? If
Kupari has been given every chance, right, Huss?
Kupari?
I mean, every time the fourth line has been out there, he's been on it. So I don't know how he's not on it. I mean, it could be Gustafsson, but when they played together, Gus was on the wing, Huss. So that's not to say Gustafsson can't move to center. But for me, Kupari's the fourth line center. And I would just put it this way. For Lambert, I just don't see them using that formula, the 3 scoring lines and the checking line, in the opener against Connor McDavid. They're going to want to have Lowry out against him as often as possible. So I don't see him being in the opening night lineup, though I could still see him as, 13th or 14th forward if that's the way that they go. But again, I think that Brad Lambert, I mean, again, I'm not saying this is guaranteed to be a Kyle Connor situation where he goes down for 4 games and then he's in the NHL forever. But that I wouldn't rule out that possibility. I just think the easiest move for the Jets, especially having lost 2 defensemen already, if they're worried about waivers, which is a possibility at all times, I think Lambert going to the Moose is the easiest transaction. And often when it comes down to, decisions that are come to a coin flip, you go with the easier decision. Now, again, Lambert could change that thinking with a great game on Friday night, and he's had a solid camp. But this was never if Brad Lambert goes to the Moose on October 7th or 6th, Huss, it doesn't mean it's like Ville Heinola and it takes 4 years for him to get back to having a full-time job. Like, Brad Lambert is going to have a full-time job with the Jets no later than next season. And I still think he could have a full-time job before that time, and it could be this season. But I'm not here certain saying he has a full-time job as of October 3rd.
I want to go back to Kupari for a minute. Like, has he, in your opinion, had a great camp? I mean, he played 28 games last year, never scored, and was basically a complete afterthought for the entire second half of the season and the playoffs. And a guy like Gustafsson was consistently playing ahead of him. I'm just sort of, or is this the organization going, hey, we put a lot in, we really wanted to get this guy because of the way he was acquired? Is he the one that's kind of getting the first crack at it? I'm just surprised that we went from where we were at the end of this season to now all of a sudden Rasmus Kupari's in the top 12. I'm not sure he's in my top 15.
Yeah, so I just would put it this way. It has very little to do with the trade. I think it has way more to do with the projection of the player dating back to his draft year and the reason why he was included. It's not just because he was included. They feel there is a player there that can be unlocked. I mean, he played in Todd McClellan's system with LA, which is a very defensively responsible system. This is a guy for a team that's trying to get faster. Rasmus Kupari is one of the fastest skaters on the Winnipeg Jets. And hey, I understand completely that hasn't translated into A, offensive success, or B, defensive success. But this is a guy who generates chances in practice. He hasn't, converted a ton of those chances. And certainly he's gone, almost 2 seasons now without scoring a goal at the NHL level. He definitely didn't come back from the injury well last year after the shoulder separation or whatever the injury was. And like you said, he was an afterthought for sure. I just think that the injury to Gustafsson now, again, even if it's day to day, kind of has opened up the door. But, every time we see, configuration of the fourth line, or Morgan Barron's out there today with Kupari, I mean, would that have been Gustafsson's job if he was healthy? It's certainly possible. But, I mean, Rick Bowness had Rasmus Kupari in that 4C slot, and, what I've been witnessing at training camp, I think that he has the, inside edge on being that player right now. And again, if some folks want to say, well, that should be Brad Lambert's job, and you want to do the Nick Patan thing where he's the 4C playing on the second power play, I have some time for it, and I can understand why people want to go that way. But much like I said with Solomonson, if Brad Lambert doesn't usurp Vlad Nemesnikov for the 2C role for me, I still see a lot of value in him, being a dominant player at the American Hockey League level. He was an excellent player. He was an all-star at the American Hockey League level. But again, we used the Logan Stankoven comparison a lot last year, Huss. Brad Lambert could easily be Logan Stankoven of 2024, 2025, where he goes down and not just excels, but dominates, to the point where you're among the league leading scorers throughout the entire season. And then gets a chance to come up rather than the Jets spending a bunch of assets and trying to bring a temporary solution for 2C. So again, and I don't know that he necessarily needs 5 or 6 months in the American League, Huss. I just think that there may be a little bit more refinement and seasoning for Brad Lambert. I would just put it this way. the way that he advanced under Mark Morrison last year, I don't buy the argument that Brad Lambert is too good for the American Hockey League. He could be very much closing in on being a 4A player, but I think there's a little, some edge work, not in terms of his skating, but there's some work around the edges that he could still benefit from, being a dominant player and, being a 20-plus minute a game player rather than a 12-minute a game player.
Well, if that's the case, I don't think we can compare him to Stankoven, because Stankoven went to the American Hockey League last year and put up numbers where he was too good for the American Hockey League. They called him up to Dallas, and he's never looking back. And
well, no, but that's what I mean.
He's not going back this year.
No, but that's what I mean. He can be the Logan Stankoven of this season, like the guy that Stankoven was. I mean, he was the best player on that team, and part of the reason he stayed down longer is because of the cap situation for the Dallas Stars being so close to the ceiling. So, again, I don't think it's a 6-month tutelage that he requires, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Jets could see the benefit of him playing a little bit more. I mean, the 8 pounds of muscle is noticeable, Huss, but I mean, he's still getting pushed off the puck, which again is normal for a 20-year-old individual, no matter how strong you are. So I think he's knocking on the door, but I don't think that I don't think any of us can make the argument that he's been head and shoulders better than Vladislav Nemesnikov. And Nemesnikov, part of his responsibility, despite his chemistry with Nikolai Ehlers, is the defensive responsibility on that line, right? So
that'll be where the trust is. I mean, I'm not sure that he provides as much offense as Brad Lambert, but
sure, of course.
For sure. I mean, and considering some of the matchups and the guys that he's playing with, I mean, in Perfetti and Ehlers, you want to have a guy that can cut that. I just have a lot more time, especially if we're talking about playing Kupari at the fourth center, is getting Brad Lambert NHL time in a role that's not the pressure of the 2C.
Yeah, that's fair.
Playing with some good NHL players and sort of, getting your feet wet that way instead of going 0 to 60, getting plopped in and going, oh yeah, here you go. You're facing off against McDavid when Knobloch has the last change in Edmonton.
Or a Draisaitl for that matter, right? I mean, that's the other part. We're all saying, well, yeah, Lowry's got to go up against Connor. Well, yeah, great. That still means that one of the other lines has got to go up against Leon. And again, I think that Brad Lambert has had a very strong camp. Like I said, it hasn't been as eye-popping or highlight reel momenting as some of his past camps, but I've liked his camp overall. I don't think he's hurt his cause. I just think there have been times where I think I wouldn't use the word tentative, because he's not a tentative player because he's so explosive. I just think that the game needs to slow down a little bit for Brad because of his feet, right? His feet are so fast. The processing of the information and knowing the right reads and just trusting himself to be responsible defensively, but still not lose that offensive element. So again, and that can be honed a little bit easier in the American Hockey League level. Like I said, whether it's 4 games or 14 or 40, I think that there's still a little, again, and there's learning for all 20-year-olds, but I do expect Brad Lambert to be part of this. Again, I'm just not certain it's going to be on October 6th or 9th here.
Do you think Kupari clears waivers if he's on it?
I don't know. I mean, there's lots of teams that, near the bottom of the standings that could see him as a useful player. First-round draft picks get numerous opportunities, Huss, and I think he's a guy that because of his speed, he would be claimed. I understand some people don't feel that way, and when you go that long without scoring, you start to run out of runway, which is totally fine. But I just think that the Jets feel as though there's still a player there that can be unlocked. And I think that's why they'd like to give Rasmus Kupari a little bit more of a runway here before they're ready to throw in the towel on his services.
How long? Listen, to me, this is a bit of a development. I would have never had Kupari in potentially the opening night lineup and probably not even on the roster when I'm putting together the 23 that'll be on there. If he is there, considering what happened last season, what does he have to do to stay there? And how long does he get if that isn't the case, in your opinion?
Yeah, so if you're not scoring, you have to provide something else. Now, if that's going to be physical, he's a guy that gets on the forecheck. So he needs to be a little bit more physical, and he's got to finish some of his chances. This is sort of like what Rick Bowness said to David Gustafsson. I know and it's totally different because Gustafsson is so much more responsible defensively than Kupari for me. So if you want to stay in the line, we've talked about this forever, Huss. The Jets had 11 double-digit goal. They still have 11 double-digit goal scorers on their roster from last year in their forward group. So Kupari, you can't be a 3 or 4 goal scorer. He's got to be a double-digit guy because the competition would suggest that they can be double-digit guys given the ice time that they're currently getting under, what they got under Scott Arniel when he was running the bench in Rick's absence last year. So you have to either be super responsible defensively and you have to provide some complementary offense. And if you can't do that, then I think that he'll move into the, more of the, 13th, 14th, 15th forward spot where, that you may have him on the roster. Again, he does things in practice that as a coach, you see kind of the raw materials and it just hasn't translated into the NHL game yet. And like you said, I don't think the runway is super long. I wouldn't say it's 5 games, but I'm not sure that it's 25, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'll certainly agree with you on that. I don't think it'll be that long. And I mean, I don't know. For me, if they're looking to get a little bit more offensive upside in that fourth line, playing with a guy like Alafio and Barron, I'm putting Brad Lambert there. And if I want the most well-rounded player that you can count on that probably is more of a prototypical fourth liner, I'm putting Gus there. I mean, you're a big Gus guy. I mean, like if it came down to you, who are you playing at 4C on a Monday, assuming everyone is healthy? Gustafsson or Kupari?
For sure. I mean, I personally would have Gustafsson because, again, I believe in his offensive upside that goes along with his ability to kill penalties and make the people around him better, and his defensive game. Now, again, let's just put it this way: if you could put Rasmus Kupari's legs on David Gustafsson, you'd have an incredible fourth line player, and he's not even a fourth line player then, right? So I would just put it that way. I think that Gus has had a good camp. I had a good chat with him the other day, and I think that he's in a really good spot mentally, Huss, whereas in the past he's sort of been, kind of bogged down by the battles that he's found himself in. He's found himself in a way better place mentally, just sort of focusing on his own game and, his improvements on the skating front. But again, when you're a player that's been on the bubble a lot, it's almost impossible to not be aware of your surroundings. So you need to be aware of them. You just can't get bogged down by them. So I just think the one thing that's sort of compounded matters, Huss, and made it a little bit confusing in that fourth line battle is how often that Scott Arniel has, singled out Jared Anderson-Dolan for his kind of dog on a bone kind of mentality. So, and he's another guy who's interesting, Huss, a 2-time 7-goal scorer in the NHL with the LA Kings in 40 some games and 34 games. So, and he also was a 20-plus goal scorer with the Ontario Reign. So I'm not here to say he's a guarantee to be a double-digit guy, but he has some offensive upside to his game also to go with the tenacity. So I think that it's been a little bit more complicated. But again, if it's Gustafsson is healthy enough, I think you can easily make the case for him. But I just get the sense that Rasmus Kupari is going to start the season in that spot. And again, if he doesn't do it, that also gives you the ability to call up Brad Lambert, 5 games in, 10 games in, whatever it may be, and sort of try that, approach where you're looking for a little bit more offense out of the fourth line job. But again, we'll see how things unfold, and a lot could happen before Sunday's deadline. And, there could be claims there, the Columbus Blue Jackets are still kind of needing to get above the floor. So, would the Jets have some pieces that could appeal to them? I would imagine, but I don't know that can relate to having a defenseman being involved in a deal or anything like that. But still, I would just put it this way, probably, Huss, still a few twists and turns before Wednesday night at 9:09 when the Jets and Oilers get after it.
Yeah, no doubt. I see big hitter. Man, does Huss hate Kupari. That is absolutely not true. I mean, listen, I thought at the start of last year, I thought he was exciting. I thought he was flying. We had a lot of fun talking about how fast he was. Just nothing was happening when he was on the ice. And I mean, as I say, I think David Gustafsson has continued to grow into the player that they've been trying to create. I just don't I haven't seen anything that would make the argument to me that right now, going into this season, that Rasmus Kupari would be ahead of Gus when it comes. Like Anderson-Dolan doesn't play center, right? So I mean, like,
not to my knowledge.
We're talking about the center position.
Yeah,
it's one of those guys. I mean, Morgan Barron's been in there.
He has played center before, so that would be the other thing. That's why I said. That's why. Sorry, I should have finished that thought when I said things got complicated by Anderson-Dolan's strong camp. I could easily see Morgan Barron getting more reps at the 4C job, and then having that be the line with Iafallo, just based on the tenacity that Anderson Dolan plays with. But again, I'm not dismissing Gustafsson's camp or his abilities. Again, I'm still not selling on Gustafsson's stock. I think there's still a good player there, and I think that Gustafsson could eventually be a double-digit guy, much like a lot of the Jets' fourth line was last year, or all of the fourth line was last year when it was Barron.
They need to play him with Perfetti at some point. I mean, last year on at least a couple, I think of the Gus's, 3 or 4 goals, 2 of them just happened to be, I think, off of line changes when he was on with Perfetti, and Perfetti set him up.
And they were good with the Moose together that year that Cole played in the COVID year, I believe. There was some connection happening there for sure.
Well, we'll get to Perfetti and the rest of the lineup next week when we know who's actually on the team. Definitely a fun conversation, Kenny. What's coming up in the Freep over the next few days as we get down to cut down day?
Yeah, you bet. Mike's Mike McIntyre locked in with Elias Solomonson today to discuss that journey of chasing down that 7th or 6th or 7th spot here. So he's got that. I was doing more preview work here today. Then we'll have a big preview. Dump and Chase will make its debut. We got some storylines. I know you had Wish on yesterday, Huss. We're going to have our storylines to watch, and you've been discussing many of them during the course of the week there, and the old annual predictions, including award winners that. Sometimes when we look back at game 41, you kind of wonder, how did I come to that conclusion? But the beauty of the picks, Huss, you get to keep making them, whether you're right or wrong, and we try to be right more than we're wrong. But we just do our best on those fronts.
Well, okay, on that prediction note, final one for you going out. If this starts the way we see the lineup in practice today, Connor Scheifele, Velarde, Perfetti, Nemetsnikov, Ehlers, Niederreiter, Lowry, Appleton, Barron, Kapari, Iafallo, every single forward returning from last year. The loss of Brendan Dillon on the blue line. So we've got Fleury and Miller. How big of a step back does this team take from what they did last year?
Yeah, so, I mean, I still see the Jets as a playoff team. I mean, do I have them certainly in third? I'm not sure. I'm going to probably pick them third in the Central. I think the Dallas Stars probably win the division, and then it's either probably going to be Nashville or Colorado. We're still not certain about the goaltending in Colorado. There are some question marks there. You saw it firsthand. Georgiev giving up 7 in the opener, right? So I still believe that team is going to be capable. Jared Bednar is one of the best coaches in the National Hockey League, but I see the Jets as a playoff team. I'm going to pick them to be third. Could they be a wild card team instead? Yes, but when you're working off the baseline of a Vezina Trophy winner in goal, and I know, Huss, hey, I get it. It was a rough go on Friday in Minnesota, and yesterday when Connor Hellebuyck gave up 2 in the first 5 shots, I'm guessing some people were thinking, well, what is happening here? But then he turned aside. The next 14, and again, I understand that wasn't the regular Flames lineup, but
not worried about it.
Connor is a guy that puts up the brick wall when necessary, in most occasions. So I would say that that's the least of their concerns. When you have the Vezina Trophy and a 2-time winner, a 4-time finalist, I would say their baseline is solid. I think that because of us, I know that a lot of people, and I'm not discounting the loss. I mean, I think Brendan Dillon and Nate Schmidt are both huge cultural losses, aside from the way that they played last year in the second and third pairing. There isn't really a lot of, nobody on the back end plays as physically as Brendan Dillon and brings that little bit of intimidation factor that not a lot of players have anymore. A fear factor, if you will. But I think that the Jets' commitment to 5-man unit team defense and having it be now the third year. Now, again, we understand they abandoned the commitment 2 years ago in the second, I wouldn't even say second half. I'd say in the last 25, 30 games. Last year was there throughout the season. It didn't happen in the playoffs, but this is a team that knows the formula. And when you know what you're supposed to look like, to borrow a phrase from a former Jets head coach who happened to hoist the Stanley Cup over his head last June, when you know what you're supposed to look like, the changes and the buy-in are much easier. The buy-in is much easier to get, and the changes you need to make are much easier to identify. So for me, I see the Jets as a playoff team. I think they're probably a 96 to 100 point team rather than a 110 point team. But although the Jets can't be thinking about April, it's much more important for me to see what they can do when it matters most than being a 110 or 114 point team the way that they were when they reached the conference final in 2018. But obviously you need to you're going to need probably 95 plus to get there. So it's a little bit chicken and egg. But for me, I think this team is a playoff team. They've got enough pieces up front. I think Gabriel Velarde is poised for a 40-75 type of
he looked
season
good last night.
As long as he plays 75 plus, Huss, this is a guy that is going to be a dominant force. I see Kyle Connor, competing for the Rocket Richard Trophy, and this is not a stretch. And I know I've been on this bandwagon before, and I said it 2 years ago when the Jets were in Banff. If Kyle Connor is healthy, Huss, you can mark him. He could score 50. Now, again, is it likely that Velarde gets 40 and he gets 50? I mean, I understand that would be asking a lot of those guys, but they have the potential and ability to do so. I'm also going to say comfortably that Nikolai Ehlers is north of 30 for the first time in his career. And I think Josh Morrissey is going to be back over 70 points on the back end. I think he's going to have a massive year. He made, obviously some strides on the defensive side where he focused on last year and still had, I think, 68 or 69 points. I see him being in the Norris Trophy in the top 5 for sure. And I think this is the first time he makes it to the awards as a finalist for the Norris Trophy. So if those things happen, Huss, Jets could be closer to first than third, but we'll see.
Listen, I love the optimism. I'm here for it, Ken. I'm here for it. You have a great one tonight, buddy, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the rink and next week when the puck drops on the season.
Great to be with you. Glad you had a blast up at the President's Cup. Just quick shout out there. Dude. I know you've mentioned it. Ryan Hart, our pal from Winnipeg here, did an incredible job as tournament director. I know there was some great Manitoba flavor, both in terms of people that work at the course, people that attended the event. It looked incredible on the tube. Wish I had been there with you. But a great weekend. Was out with the St. Malo fellas out at Lake of the Sandhills for a late season adventure. But great to see that event. And as you know, I was at the Bomber game, and what an atmosphere with the 50 burger on the Elks. The Bomber game was just perfect weather and a fun game. And we didn't hear a lot of Collaros talk about whether he's going to have more touchdowns than interceptions after Friday night, as it turns out.
Well, he's now on the right side of the ledger after a 6-0 performance and a really intriguing game tomorrow night against the Hamilton Tiger Cats, who've sort of hung around a lot longer than many people, myself included, thought they would after they were 2-9. Wiebe, good stuff as always. Looking forward to you and Kenny getting going for the season as well. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, have a great weekend. And I should say Kenny and Rennie season preview will be Tuesday afternoon coming out of your show, Huss, 3 p.m. on the old YouTube channel. So check that out, and then we'll obviously be ready for Wednesday night's opener against
Did Reynolds get his hair cut yet?
He did, yeah, much to his chagrin. But he still looks good. I think he looks sharp. He's looking a little younger now. Again, as someone who had, hard to believe for some people who look at this bald head, as someone who had some flow in high school, I thought Sean was looking good, but I think it was time for a little bit of a trim. So good on him.
He was on the verge of doing the full Fabio look. Like he was going to be doing I can't believe it's not butter commercials.
Harley Davidson sponsorship was on the potential for what we had going there. Yeah,
that'll be great. Well, anyways, I'm looking forward to seeing the new look and hearing the show next Tuesday, and of course after Winnipeg Jet games once we get going next week. Thanks for doing this, dude.
Have a great weekend, my friend. Always great to be with you.
All right, good stuff. There's Ken Wiebe, Winnipeg Free Press. He and Mike all over the Winnipeg Jets. And, of course, you can follow him on X over at Weeb's World. Let's get Remo back in here. We're going to get to the cool bet lines in a minute. Not surprising, we had an extended conversation with Ken today, Reem, considering where we're at in the calendar and many of the topics around this team going into next week.
Yeah, Ken certainly had a lot to say. Great having him on at this time of year. And we did have a bit of a technical issue during that. So it'll all be on the podcast. If you miss it, I'll post it separately, maybe a couple minutes. So one answer of Ken's didn't come through. But hey, we're all here having a good time and counting down. How about Ken with all those bold predictions? And I'm going to have to put that as a reel, just as he's going rapid fire there. I did see Money Puck come out with their predictions backed by their model. They have the Jets
the wheels
at
out.
the 60.8% to make the playoffs, and How about this? 26.7% to make the second round. Man, the Central got tough. Nashville ahead of them to make the playoffs. LA. How about Vegas? Man, I looked at Vegas's roster. Their defense very good. Their forwards questionable. I thought, losing Marchessault is big for them. And who else is ahead of them? Colorado and Dallas are not locks, but over 80%.
Would you rather have Hurdle or Marchessault?
Man, Hurdle is playing third line center for them, according to Daily Faceoff, with Holtz and Nicholas Waugh. I don't know. Their top line, Vegas, Eichel centering Barbashev and Victor Olofsson. That doesn't scare me. They're very, very balanced. The second line, Carlson centering Dorofeyev and Stone. He's looking to take another step forward, Dorofeyev. And third line, I mean, these are like solid lines, but this isn't like the powerhouse Vegas team when they won the Stanley Cup. No, their defense is very strong with Theodore Pietrangelo and Hanifin.
Well, listen, their center ice position is legit. I mean, you got a star in Jack Eichel, William Karlsson. I mean, like, what would you rather have, the Jets center ice position or Vegas?
Well, I think they got Jack Eichel. I mean, I'm going to go. I mean, we're talking about the Jets second line center, which is Nemestikov. So I'm going to go Vegas. But I don't know. This team doesn't. I looked at their rosters. Like, these guys aren't as scary as they were. We'll have to see. I mean, will they manipulate LTI? We haven't even talked about Vegas today in the news because they just got out of Robin Lehner's contract. I mean, they don't have to put him in LTIR.
Do you have that clip? Do you have that clip from Elliott?
Yeah.
Like, for those, I thought we'd touch on this at the end of the show, and I know we've gone long, and we'll get to the lines in just a second. But first of all, just before we move to this Lehner business, wrapping up this little bit on Vegas, I have been talking to Gary, and he's like, Victor Olofsson is going to have a monster season this year. Like, I think I might have taken him with my last pick in the hockey draft, just based on that flyer from Lawless. So there you have it. They're very high on Victor Olofsson, who, if I'm not mistaken, like, he had a pretty good year.
A couple years ago, he did. In Buffalo.
Let's see here. What did he score?
I don't think he was as good last year.
He's got 3 20-goal seasons and scored 28 2 years ago.
Okay. I mean, he did not have a good year last year. 15 points in 51 games. A couple years before, he was solid. Best year, 21-22.
Yeah.
49 and 72. How old is he now? He's 29 years old.
7th rounder. How about that? 7th rounder in the 2014 draft, Victor Olofsson. Anyways, back to this Robin Lehner thing. And Elliott basically described, for those of you that have missed it, he was on LTIR. LTIR guys have to go back, occasionally to check in with doctors. And apparently he says he can't go back to Vegas for reasons that were not listed. And the way that they're figuring this out is that Lehner's still going to get paid, but he won't count against the cap for the Vegas Golden Knights. Can't say that I've heard this one before.
You think Dustin Byfuglien wants to call the Jets and get a do-over, and maybe he can get paid to not show up? I mean, he had to forfeit 2 years' salary. How did Robin Lehner get this sweet deal where they pay him, and Vegas getting bailed out that doesn't count on LTIR and doesn't count against the cap? Seems fishy, and not really much of an explanation. There's something going on they don't want to discuss because it's personal, but it just feels like Vegas getting, the salary cap doesn't apply to Vegas, Huss. That's what we've learned. NHL bending over to accommodate Vegas once again. They get everything, Huss. We get nothing here in Winnipeg. Vegas gifted a Stanley Cup championship.
Scam league.
Exactly.
Emily Kaplan on Robin Lehner. Sources told ESPN there was a specific reason the goalie could not be in Vegas. Given the sensitive nature of Lehner's situation, league sources called it, quote, an unprecedented and highly unique case. So Vegas is paying Lehner without the cap hit. All right, listen, we've gone really long, but we do want to get to the Cool Bet lines. We had a fun time today in the lock shop. And, oh, my God. Well, my Royals are through. We cashed that at plus 130, plus 150 for the series. We are still staying hot, but just looking to see what we've got cooking up for. Okay, so we've got NFL tonight. Bucks and Falcons. Atlanta minus 2.5 favorites. Tampa plus 2.5. It's moved a little bit over the last hour or so. Atlanta minus 133. Tampa plus 123 on the money line. We did put together a little parlay for today. We like Mooney, 47 or more receiving yards. Where are we here? Where's Mooney? Oh, yeah. Mooney, 45 plus receiving yards. Mike Evans, 60 plus receiving yards. And Bijan Robinson, anytime TD. That one's at plus 485. And Patty's got his primetime parlay. Baker Mayfield over 10.5 rushing yards. Judon to get a sack. And over 3.5 field goals. In baseball, one game tonight. The Mets and Brewers in a deciding game 3 after the Brewers came back in the 8th inning to beat the Mets and tied at 3. Mets are plus 110. Brewers are minus 130. And the matchups are already set for the other series right now. We've got the Dodgers and Padres, Royals and Yankees, and Tigers and Guardians. And how bizarre is that, Remis, that 3 of the 4 teams left standing in the AL are all from the AL Central?
Yeah, the AL Central's been pretty bad for a while, and the Tigers on this absolute miracle run. Well, they got Skubal starting, but a bunch of guys that are like, who are these guys? But I think they had like 2% chance at one point in the season, 10 games back of first. But here they are, taking out the Astros. No one's going to be upset about that. I do like Cleveland, though. Maybe about time for them to get over the hump and finally get a World Series. They've had a really strong year. So that series, very intriguing.
If you haven't played a cool bet before, use the promo code WST. Hook you on your first deposit. We'll hook you up with a 100% bonus up to $200 on your first deposit. And as I said, red hot lately. 7-1 against the spread in the CFL the last 2 weeks. We made our picks today for this weekend, and we'll be putting together a CFL parlay that'll be up in the exclusives. And then tomorrow is our best bets in the lock shop. That's at noon. You don't want to miss that. 10-5-1 against the spread this year, which has been great considering just how nutty this season has gone so far. Before we go, Remis, just speaking of baseball, I'm sending this over to you right now into your DMs. The Toronto Sun put together maybe the funniest cover page I can remember.
Dear
celebrating the Blue Jays announcing that Ross Atkins is back, Mark Shapiro is back, and John Schneider is back as well. Here it is, folks. Wieners and losers. They hit a home run with Looney Dogs this year, but that's it. Jays brass grilled about pathetic season, but come up with stale answers. And there's Atkins and Shapiro in hot dog costumes, holding a hot dog. Some incredible work by the people that put together the cover of the Toronto Sun.
Yeah, I saw some of the quotes. Mark Shapiro saying that if he had a better replacement for Ross Atkins, he would do that. Not exactly a ringing endorsement, but for a group that's had 0 playoff wins in 9 years, they've had a lot of time here to put something together. The best work they did was build a spring training facility and renovate the ballpark. They haven't developed any MLB players. Again, no success in the postseason. Very reminiscent of the J.P. Ricciardi run Jays in the early 2000s. Has the 2 least likable guys, replaced Alex Anthopoulos, who won a World Series in Atlanta. Hey, their attendance was up there, but to spend, have the MLB salary that they do and this lack of success, colossal disappointment. Nobody likes them. So we'll see how it goes going forward. I got to sign Vlad.
Fans can thank the Royals though by beating Baltimore yesterday The Jays no longer have the longest postseason losing streak in the majors. That is held by the Orioles, who were swept by Kansas City. And as we mentioned, the Royals moving on to take on the mighty Yankees in the next round. Cannot wait for that. That's going to do it for us. I hope you all have a great night. Enjoy the baseball and the NFL game tonight. Tomorrow will be all over Bombers. And, of course, the Jets' final preseason game heading into the weekend. Don't forget, new Deep Dive is up with Gabe Velarde, with Connor and Liz. That's on the channel, as well as CFL 110 with myself and Hammer. And don't forget, gang, tickets are available now for the WST package games, our game of the month. First one, October 20th, celebrating Brian Little, welcoming in the Pittsburgh Penguins. Sunday, October 20th. Hope you could join us. Go to winnipegjets.com/WST to get in on that and join us up in section 316. It's going to do it for us. Have a great night. We will see you tomorrow. Thanks to all the sponsors that make WST happen and all of you for making us a part of your day. Have a good one. Catch you Friday.
Oh my God! Oh! Shut it down! Let's go home!
Thanks for tuning in to Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast feed at winnipegsportstalk.com.